Hello everyone, my name is Mike Burnfire, and I play a lot of Fallout New Vegas. Believe it or not, it's one of my most played games of all time. I believe the playlist that Zach and I made can attest to that. Currently over 500 episodes, and growing. And being so familiar with this game means that I can see it as a whole, and I can acknowledge that it has some flaws, some aspects could be improved upon. Although this game is one of the greatest RPGs of all time, beloved by a community that cherishes and zealously defends it, it was also very rushed, with a development time of only 18 months. It's also a product of its time, held back by technical limitations, and honestly, a bit of outdated game design. And if I'm being brutally honest, it lacks some important elements that the rest of the games in the Fallout series are known for. Today, I would like to talk about this game in extensive detail, talking about the parts of it that I think are incredibly well designed, but also pointing out the noteworthy flaws and missing features. I'll be talking deeply about quest design, since that's the part of these games that I care about the most. And I'll be mentioning and showcasing fan-made mods that the community has made to fix perceived problems. I'll be covering everything, from the moment the game starts until way past the end of the credits. And I will fluctuate wildly between legitimate criticisms of major systems to infantile nitpicking of the things that bugged me personally. I will make no distinction between the two, and I apologize for nothing. If you disagree with anything I say in this video, if you think my critiques and suggestions are wrong, that's okay. At the end of the day, a lot of this is just my personal opinion, and me being Captain Hindsight. Here's what they should have done in this video game from 15 years ago. But really, I just wanted a reason to talk for several hours about this game that I really like. So, let's get started. So I think this opening cutscene is a great introduction. Starting off in what seems to be outside, but just kidding, it's a painting of the Lucky 38 casino, ominously panning out to show that it's empty, for reasons that the player might not understand just yet. Pans out to the rest of the strip, you see the Gamora, there's the actual moon in all its glory, NCR troopers. Also note how there's no dividing wall between the two sections of the strip, that's nice. The game doesn't feel the need to tell you exactly who these people are, it just shows them doing things and it stirs your curiosity.
When atomic fire consumed the Earth.
And then the narration proper happens, and this is where it starts to lose me a little bit. The narrator does a great job. I don't mean to take anything away from Ron Perlman. I just think this section in particular is a little too explainy, a bit of a big lore dump. This would be good promotional material, absolutely. To entice somebody who's never played this game before to check it out, this would be a great advertisement. But I think it's a bit dry. People want to experience the story, not be told the story, you know? Besides, all this stuff about the NCR, the Legion, the battle for the Hoover Dam, all that stuff will be explained literally in the first town. You'll talk to Sunny Smiles and Trudy and Easy Pete and Chet, and hell, Joe Cobb will tell you about the NCR. Everybody will talk about the setting for this game in the first town. You don't need to front load a bunch of it. And then we pick back up here at the gravesite, and it starts to catch my attention again.
Truth is, the game was rigged from the start.
That's an amazing shot. And honestly, seeing the cons gleefully smiling at you, a little detail I hadn't noticed previously. And of course, as soon as you begin, all the messages pop up notifying you of different DLCs and pre-order packages that have been added, and it is unnecessary. It's tedious, I don't like it. Nowadays, whenever I play this game, I've got mods on that obviously stop all these messages from popping up, but also takes these early game pieces of gear that have been randomly dumped into your pocket and somewhat break the game balance for the first few hours. It redistributes them throughout the world as things you can find, which is a much better way to do that. But in terms of the vanilla game, this is just how it is.
You're awake.
And they even interrupt Doc Mitchell. It's so bad. Oh, it's so bad. If this is your first time playing the game, what a bad introduction this is.
How about that?
Okay, I think we're done now. I enjoy Doc Mitchell. I don't know anybody who doesn't. This is a great way to ease the player into the game. It doesn't have to be crazy bombastic or cinematic over the top. Just a gentle introduction with a quiet character, a warm face. Obviously, this character creation screen is a bit outdated. You can't even edit your body type. Just male or female, and that's the body you've got. You can't make him more muscular or more obese. Just gotta have this. Everyone's got the exact same body type. I do like that it gives you a couple of different presets. Find some that you like, or some that's close enough, and start working from there. And then you can further customize it, shape, tone, eye color. Not all that important, of course, because most of the time, most players will be playing in first-person view anyway. But still, there are some players that play in third-person. And even if you don't see your character, you'll know if you're wearing something cool or if you're wearing something dorky, so it's important that you look good. There's a decent amount of haircuts. Not all of them are awful. A lot of them are pretty good. Could be more, of course, but could be fewer. There's actually a lot more different choices when it comes to facial hair. I didn't even realize this. There's like almost 4 times as many options when it comes to facial hair. Someone really liked having facial hair as an option. Really, though, again, this is a nice, quiet introduction. No stress. You can move around freely. Well, within the confines of the house until the tutorial is over, but you can explore a few things, check things out. And now it's time to build our character. We'll choose our special attributes at the Vigomatic Vigor Tester. Then we'll choose the skills we want and which ones we want tagged. And then we'll also pick up a couple of traits. And honestly, it's a bit daunting. Some of you might be rolling your eyes after hearing me say that, but there is such a thing as choice paralysis. For Fallout 4, it's not really much of an option. You choose your special attributes, and there are no skills or traits, you just go. This one has the potential to be a little more daunting, especially for new players. It might have been a good idea to give the player an option to skip the Vigor Tester by choosing a couple of pre-selects. For instance, Doc Mitchell could have asked you what your previous occupation was, and you could have said politician or cowboy, mercenary, hunter, gambler, soldier, and then it would have pre-selected all of your special attributes and even skills for you. As a veteran player, I actually do like going back and tweaking my character build down to the specific attributes, so I'm glad that's an option. Though while we're talking about the different special attributes, I'd like to point out that they're not all equal to each other. The worst one is, by far, charisma, and I don't think that's a controversial opinion. We have joked several times on this channel that charisma is a dump stat. It's the stat that you put to 1 so you can distribute the points to the attributes that actually matter. And we said that as a lark, but it's actually true. Charisma governs very little in the actual game. It makes your companions a little more bullet resistant. It allows you to grab the animal friend perk if you don't want to shoot every random mole rat you see. And there are a few charisma options like giving gum to children or flirting with a soldier, and it doesn't really go anywhere. But that's kind of it. It doesn't do anything else. And if you're trying to roleplay as somebody who's charismatic and has got a silver tongue to persuade people, you can still do that even after setting your charisma to 1, because the stats that actually determine whether or not you can persuade people are the skills, like speech and barter. Now, I've experimented with various mods that modify how charisma works, and I've thought up different ways on how it could have been better implemented. For instance, there are a number of perks out there that would have benefited from having charisma as a prerequisite. Basically, all the lady killer style perks. The ones where you're charming a man or a woman and persuading them to get close to you so you can backstab them. You would think that would be charisma gated, but nope, you don't need to have any charisma to be a lady killer. Perhaps there could be unlockable perks where if you've got the prerequisite amount of charisma, you could have even more followers. So instead of just having 1 humanoid companion and 1 robot companion, you could have a total of 3 companions. Even up to 4 or 5 companions if you got max charisma. Might be a little unbalanced, but it would be a lot of fun. Or, and I think this is a really good idea, the amount of charisma you have changes how quickly your reputation with various factions change. So if you've got 1 charisma and you do a bunch of stuff for the town of Goodsprings, then sure, you can be liked, maybe even accepted. But if you've got max charisma, then even doing a few random jobs around town will endear you to them. As it stands in the game, there are a couple of different factions that are really hesitant to idolize you. I think the Brotherhood of Steel is one such faction. Without visiting any of the DLC content, you're unlikely to reach maximum affiliation with them. But if you've got higher charisma, then theoretically it might be a bit easier. Another idea would be to tie charisma to the speech skill, because speech is inherently a very powerful skill in New Vegas. There are a lot of different doors and windows you can open if you've got high speech. So tying the most worthless special attribute to one of the best skills would be a way to keep each other in check. The rest of these special attributes are relatively equal. Some of them are weaker than others, some of them could be tweaked a bit more. And I do want to commend the game for keeping the low intelligence character build alive, where if you've given your character build less than 3 points of intelligence, I think, it opens up unique dialogue with a lot of different characters that exemplify just how dumb your character is. That is delightful. And it gives you one more reason to play through the game yet again with a brand new character build to see what silly options the dumb characters have. So now we get to pick our skills with Doc Mitchell. He's going to show us a bunch of ink blot tests and give us a couple of surveys, which is probably it's not the worst way to pre-select your skills for you. It's kind of fun. So yeah, there's a bunch of different options, and depending on the ones you pick, he will pre-select your skill points for you. These next few ink blot tests are also a lot of fun. Not everyone's options are going to show up there because everyone interprets these portraits differently. I see two Native American women touching butts together. So he pre-selects your skills, you can tag them and untag them, but I feel like a lot of players that are sitting down to play this game for the first time will just go with what he gives you, because we really don't know what these skills all do. And again, like I said earlier, you find out later that speech checks come up very frequently. Speech is a very powerful skill, probably the most valuable skill. In fact, there are some speech checks that certainly should have been a different kind of check. Charisma check if you're trying to charm someone, or a barter check if you're doing more of a business transaction. The barter skill in-game is actually very weak because it usually just opens up the ability to bribe somebody, which I feel like that should just be a thing for every player, even if you don't have a big barter skill. Everyone should have the ability to pay caps to progress a quest. That should be one of the options, and maybe barter would be a way to skip the monetary cost of that bribe. I also think survival is a relatively weak stat, but that's mostly a consequence of the crafting system in the game not being very robust or expansive. That's a topic for a different day, but I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with survival. I think it provides a nice alternative to the medicine skill, whereas if you don't want to use modern medicines like stim packs, you can craft healing powders and healing foods from things you find on the side of the road. And this is where we're asked to select from a list of traits, up to 2 different traits. And honestly, I don't think this really needs to be here. I'm sorry, I know there's a lot of people that love the trait system and might crucify me for saying so, but again, I'm worried about choice paralysis, throwing too much at the player. And honestly, a lot of this stuff, if it's not just outright broken, could have been reworked into the perk system for when you level up. This built to destroy trait, for example, all weapons have an additional chance to critically hit, but equipment decays faster. Bump that 3% chance up to critically hit to 15% and make it a perk. This is also where you get to select the Wild Wasteland trait, and I do like that it is a thing that you can opt into. I know some players enjoy the wackiness more often than others. Some players want more of an immersive experience, where some, like me, just like the silliness. So I like that it is an option, but yeah, it doesn't need to be in this trait system, kind of tucked away at the very bottom, easy to overlook. I just think this whole system could have been done a bit more elegantly. Honestly, there are dozens of ways that the character building section could be set up, with advantages and drawbacks for each. And I could probably make a 3-hour-long video on this topic alone if I had the time. I could argue even more strongly in favor of simplification, suggesting things like the gun skill be combined with the energy weapon skill to make a universal firearm skill, or that the melee and unarmed skills be combined into a close quarters combat skill. Lockpick and sneak could be unified under a single infiltration skill, And do we really need to have a separate medicine skill if we already have repair? After all, medical treatment is basically just using the repair skill on people if you think about it. Okay, that one was a bit silly, but my point is that things could potentially be simplified a bit. There's a fair amount of overlap between the skills, the perks, the traits, and the special attributes that some systems could be combined or removed entirely. But I could also argue in favor of even more complexity, such as by breaking the gun skill back down to small guns and big guns, like with Fallout 3. Or by splitting the speech up into persuasion and deception skills. But ultimately, the system we currently have with Fallout New Vegas gets the job done well enough. It's modestly complex without being too overly simple, and most players don't have a problem with it. I'm just nitpicking and theory crafting different ways that it could be improved. There's some medicine here on the shelf. No consequence for taking that, which is great. A broken submachine gun. If you have got repair skill, you can fix that. So your skills are already coming into play. Chemistry set. I had the science skill. I can make some chems. So one of the items that the pre-order bonuses gives you was an armored jumpsuit. Normally Doc Mitchell will give you a regular jumpsuit. And then the game will just dump an armored one that is significantly better into your inventory because you pre-ordered from Blockbuster or whatever. But I played with a mod that rebalanced everything and hid things around the world, and I liked that you could find the armored jumpsuit inside this dresser, which would make a lot of sense, you know, because if you talk to Doc Mitchell, he'll say that he and his wife came from the vault, but his wife isn't around anymore. But maybe she had the armored jumpsuit. Maybe she stashed it in the dresser, and you can go ahead and find it in there. That is a much nicer way of adding this extra bonus loot into the game in an organic way that makes a lot of sense. Now, I have played with a mod on before that marked all this stuff as own, so you couldn't just take Doc Mitchell's stuff without him getting upset. But I think that it's good that you can. I think it's good to not be incredibly strict with the player in the opening room before the tutorial hasn't even begun yet. You start the tutorial by talking to Sunny Smiles, and we haven't even gotten to the tutorial yet, so maybe be a little more forgiving for new players, I say.
Here, these are yours. Was all you had on you when you was brought in.
This would have also been a good spot to dump a bunch of stuff in the player's inventory. Since Doc Mitchell is just saying, here's a bunch of stuff you had, you could have just added all that pre-order nonsense to the pile of stuff he was going to give you in the end anyway. And here is where the player is presented with the option to turn on Hardcore Mode, which has many flaws. Again, I'll get into that a bit later, but there's a reason the game does not encourage you to play in hardcore mode. It kind of feels like they threw it in almost as an afterthought. Like around the time that this game was released, survival games were starting to get really popular, so they threw in a survival mode, but it's not very good. And it's recommended that you don't play with survival mode on. And here we are presented with the big reveal of what the world is. Fallout 3 had one of these. It was a lot more impressive. And of course, we've got the notifications continuing to pop up that the DLC has been installed. This is a problem in Fallout 3 as well, and it's kind of a surprise that it's still here in Fallout New Vegas, too. Again, I have played with mods on that get rid of all these pop-up messages, and it's much nicer for it. Again, just a deluge of stuff that new players won't have any idea what the context is for all this stuff. Now to examine the world. Oh yeah, this is the world. Yeah, we done yet? Okay, so as you can see, we are presented with the town of Goodsprings. There's Victor walking down the road. Yeah, if those things weren't popping up in my face, he may have been the first thing I noticed. We talked to Victor, who's just rolling down the road. Another pop-up, because the Sierra Madre was also DLC that's been installed. God, that was so annoying. So many of these pop-ups. Yeah, so the first thing you see, or at least you would have seen, is the Goodsprings Saloon flashing up in the corner over here. Victor walking towards it. It's all designed to encourage you to walk in this general direction towards where the tutorial area starts. Some very organic design. And again, you can talk to Victor if you want to. And Easy Pete as you make your way toward the saloon. And again, he'll have more stuff to say about the NCR, the Legion, the Battle of Hoover Dam. Now is a great time to learn about that stuff if you care. and, if you don't want to talk to him right now, he'll be here later. Like, it's not going to be forced upon you. You can do it whenever you want at your leisure. And of course, it is an open world game from this point. You do not even have to go into the tutorial area. You can just start walking in any direction. Victor is walking up towards the graveyard. That's fine. You can follow him up there if you want. Or if you see something in the distance, you can walk over there and check it out, and no one's going to tell you not to go that way. And honestly, that's one of the game's biggest strengths. This game has a lot of strengths, but one of them is nothing is mandatory. You don't have to do basically anything. You just go where you want, do the quests you want, and if you don't like a quest, don't do the quest. If you don't like a person, walk away from the person or kill the person. You can kill everybody in the game. There's nobody with plot armor. You can be a complete sociopath, killing everyone you come across, and that is a valid playstyle to the game. But not the only playstyle, and there are much better ways to tackle most problems than outright violence. It's nice to have multiple options, isn't it? But anyway, the flashing and blinking neon lights of the Prospector Saloon, that is where the game wants you to go. It's why it's the first thing you see walking out the door of Doc Mitchell's house, and it's where the tutorial starts. Also, I will be using the Pip-Boy 2500 mod. It's a mod that I really do enjoy. I think it's a bit nicer of a Pip-Boy compared to the default vanilla one, and also it's kind of a pain to uninstall it. But I also feel like it's useful to differentiate it a bit more compared to Fallout 3. Don't need to have the exact same Pip-Boy models. This Pip-Boy 2500 definitely helps it stand out from the other one. So you're given a rifle, and you're told to shoot at some bottles. Right now, we're going to pretend like I don't know how to aim down sights and I miss every shot, because in Fallout 3, you didn't really have the option to aim down sights. You did a little zoom.
That's the right idea.
There we go.
Look down the sight.
Yes, now you can aim down sights. ADSing, a thing that wasn't really a thing in Fallout 3, but here you go. It's a new mechanic. But I'm just such a terrible shot. Oh, I'm so bad at video games. I'm a new player who has no idea what he's doing.
Everything all right?
I ran out of ammo.
Here. Go easy on it now. Ammo can be hard to come by out here.
And now you got more ammo for this gun. And honestly, you don't even have to shoot at it from back here. You can get up close and shoot the bottles directly.
Try crouching down and staying still. It'll help your aim.
How about this grenade rifle that was given to me by the pre-order bonuses? No, that does not count, apparently. How about a throwing spear? Doesn't count? No, it doesn't count. Pool cue doesn't count either, apparently.
Nice shot.
Thanks. I'm pretty bad at this, all right.
Well, that's a start.
So that section of the tutorial is very useful, though I do wish there were options for players who aren't specialized in guns. You don't necessarily have to have an entirely new course set up for melee builds or explosive builds, but maybe just a speech option or two here and there about how you feel more comfortable with an energy weapon in your hand, for example. But as it stands, it's still a good first section of the tutorial. And if you want, you can end it right here and skip the part where you clear out the geckos. Although the part where you clear out the geckos is pretty good too. And then we follow behind Sunny Smiles, who runs at a fairly decent speed. You know, not too fast to get too far ahead of you, but not too slow where you have to wait for her to get to you. So I'm glad she runs at a decent speed. She can't sprint. No one can sprint in this game, not even you. There is no sprinting ability, one of the more modern mechanics that doesn't really exist in this game. All right, and we just clear out the geckos. Now this next section actually has somebody you could rescue. There's a settler who's come down here to get some water and is being attacked by geckos, and it's very possible for her to die if you're not fast enough. You specifically, Sonny, you have to go faster. Go, go, go. But it's possible for both the settler or Cheyenne to die here, and Sonny will have custom dialogue if either of those options happens. You do want to save the settler if you can, because by default,
that's it.
Keeping her alive is the only way to become idolized in the town of Goodsprings. If she dies, the most you can ever be is liked. In this instance, we did keep the settler alive, and that is great. But a new player playing this game for the first time might not realize that that's not always guaranteed. In fact, I'm pretty sure the first time I played this game, I was not fast enough, and the settler did die. And maybe that's a common experience, which means that when a player picks this game up for a second time, and they're a bit better at the game, and they keep this character alive, it might take them by surprise. This game doesn't really draw any special attention to it, it's just a thing that exists in the world. Other games might try to include a little pop-up saying things like, that settler will remember that, or congratulations, she wasn't guaranteed to be saved, something to that effect. 75% of players kept this character alive during this quest, something like that. Because the developers worked hard on giving you multiple options to resolve a quest, and they want you to know about it. But this game doesn't really have that, for better or for worse. The next section of this tutorial, the final leg, is to learn how to do some crafting. So there is a crafting mechanic in this game, and it's not very robust. It's a little bit more than the bare bones minimum, but you know, it's nice. It's a nice foundation for a good crafting system. And this little quest in which you gather crafting ingredients is actually quite elegant. Again, I'll have a bit more to say about the crafting system and mechanics later, but for now, let's complete this quest. Also, I haven't really mentioned much about the world, but yeah, the world space is very brown. That's just how the game looks from start, basically to finish. There are no unique biomes. There's a little bit of snow up in the top left corner of the map, but for the most part, this is the world space. This is what you're going to be enjoying. Various shades of brown. So, not the prettiest game. It's got a nice rustic charm to it, but it's not the most appealing thing to look at. So the first crafting ingredient is down here near the schoolhouse, and here you go. It's great that it brings you to the schoolhouse, because you'll naturally be inclined to check out what's inside. And you'll have some easy enemies to kill, some low-level mantises. And also you can lockpick to get into the safe, if you've got the skills. There's also a terminal here that's easy locked. You can't quite get into it. Programmer's Digest, though. So yes, there are magazines littered throughout the world, like this Programmer's Digest, that will help you hack into terminals. Sunny Smiles mentions something to this effect. If you ask her if there's stuff to do around town, she'll give you a lockpicking magazine and explore how the lockpicking magazine will help you lockpick better. Or you can figure it out on your own just by looking at them in the menu. And here's the hacking minigame. Now, I don't hate the hacking minigame, but I have done it enough that modding it out is one of the first things I do. It's actually kind of a fun little word game, like the kind of thing you might find in the New York Times, but most players aren't going to be interested in spending a lot of time doing this, or even understanding what they're supposed to be doing. I feel like most veteran players don't actually even play the game. They look for these little symbols that reduce the amount of options you have to sift through, and once they've narrowed it down, then they start clicking options. But you got locked out. And there you go. Just kind of locked out of this terminal, basically for the rest of the game, which is not great. Luckily, I don't think there's any terminals you can become soft locked out of that are critical to beat the game, but still kind of annoying. Later on, you can put points into a hacking perk that will allow you to give this hacking minigame a second chance, but it would be nice if that perk actually prevented you from getting locked out of any terminal indefinitely, period, rather than just having a second go. While we're here, I would also point out that in the town of Goodsprings, there's no dedicated player housing. There's no good place for a player to rest their weary head. All the other houses are occupied. There might be a couple of unoccupied beds here and there. I know there is a rusty old mattress behind one of the buildings inside of a trailer that if you need to sleep, you can sleep there, but it just kind of sucks that there's no player housing. There was a mod that I played that added Edgecomb Repair, and with it you could turn this into a little player base. And I thought that was a nice little addition. Being able to turn this abandoned schoolhouse into some modest housing, that's nice. I like that a lot. Granted, that mod also went way above and beyond and made you go all the way to Helios 1 and grab some panels, find like 15 different chandeliers, find 50 different bulbs. It was a lot of fetch questing in that mod, but the basic premise, I think, is really good, and I would have loved to see it included in the vanilla game, where you just pick up all this garbage, put down a mattress, and you got some basic player housing that you could always return to in the town of Goodsprings. Be very nice. But anyway, back to gathering ingredients. We got the Xander root right here by the school. And now we'll go get the Brock flower, which is up by the gravesite. I like how Doc Mitchell's house is starting to light up a little bit now that it's starting to get in the twilight hours. Now, I say this game doesn't look super beautiful, all that brown, but there are moments that are very charming. It's starting to get dark pretty quick, actually. I feel like the time scale in this game moves very quickly. It gets dark very fast, which I'm not a fan of. Normally when I play, I have a custom time scale. I do think this area is very nice, though. And it is kind of fitting that by the time I get up here, the Goodsprings gravesite, oopsies, that it is nighttime, because when you do get up here, you can look towards the town of Vegas, and you can see the tower all lit up, like a beacon beckoning you in. It looks so good over there. Anyway, the crafting ingredient is around here. Yes, the Brock flower. Along with some distinctive cigarette butts, which will be useful for a quest later on. They are the cigarette butts that Benny was smoking, the man who shot you. You can see a few more over here, along with the grave you were dug out of. Yeah, it's pretty great that the crafting ingredients you needed together go to some pretty important locations. They really wanted to draw your eye over here. And I do like how on modern computers there's quite a long draw distance, so you can see these scorpions down here. On the older computers that I used to play this game on, that wasn't always the case. You couldn't really see the dangers that were down there. I'm grateful that Sunny Smiles waited until morning for me to return. It's very kind of her. I'm back, and you find your dog. Nice.
Let me see what you got.
So here we are in the crafting menu, and you can see there's a lot of things you can craft. A lot of things, and honestly, most of them aren't worth your time. The crafting skill requirement is going to be pretty high, and also the ingredients are going to be hard to find. But the healing powder, very useful to make. I mentioned earlier how the survival skill can be set up as kind of an opposing skill to the medicine skill, wherein if you're relying on the medicine skill, you'll be using stim packs very frequently. And the survival skill doesn't really have a counter to that as much. There's a wide variety of different foods you could eat to heal health, but there's no one item that's everywhere that you could hotkey, really. You could have natural healing powders that you craft, and steaks that you cook up, and bug sliders you make, etc., but there's no one particular item that you could add to the hotkey menu that's the equivalent of a stim pack. And I do think that's where the Outer Worlds video game made an improvement, because you can grab a bunch of different food items and cram them all together to make the healing food item. And it'd be nice if Fallout New Vegas had something of that equivalent. And now that we've finished Sunny Smiles' tutorial, we can wander around this area at our leisure. And of course, most people at this point will encounter Barton Thorne, who's just hanging out right here, the only character around. So he's got a small unmarked quest, very simplistic and can only be resolved in one way. It's a fine little quest to go kill some geckos, and then he confronts you and you have to kill him. It'd be nice if there were multiple ways to resolve his quest that didn't result in him dying. There have been a couple of times where I've just shot him in the leg a couple of times until he ran off, but there's no option to use your words to talk him down or to intimidate him to back off. Would have been nice if there were a bit more role-playing, but it's a small little side quest. Kind of a throwaway, but has the potential for a bit more to it. You know, there's actually a mod out there, maybe more than one, that allows you to spare Barton Thorne. There's actually someone who came up with a mod that gives you more options for that little unmarked quest. Because, honestly, there should be more than just the one option. You know, Fallout 4 and other Bethesda games like Starfield get a lot of criticism for having a dated engine, but this game is proof that the engine isn't really what makes a game great. This game uses basically the same engine, but it's still considered one of the best RPGs ever made. It's all about the quality of the content, and I gotta say, this game's got some real quality stuff to it. And then the first proper quest of the game.
I'm done being nice.
So there's actually two quests at play here. The Ghost Town Gunfight, if you're helping out the town of Goodsprings, and Run Goodsprings Run for Joe Cobb. And most people have done the one for the town of Goodsprings. They're an affable town. You want to help them out. You don't want to help out the gang of thugs, usually. I say I like morally gray quests, but this one is pretty cut and dry, where the powder gangers are the bad guys and Goodsprings is the good guys. And sometimes it's nice to have that kind of dichotomy. Sometimes it's nice to not have to think too hard about the morality and there's just the good people and the bad people. Especially for the early game, gotta keep it simple for the new players. I feel like most people who have played this game have helped out the town of Goodsprings fend off the Powderganger attacks. And that is a good starting quest. You talk to Trudy, she'll tell you to go check out Ringo will tell you to talk to Sonny, and then Sonny will tell you to get help from the town. And you can get help from various folks in town if you pass their various skill checks. Trudy wants you to pass either a sneak or a speech check. The shopkeep will give you armor if you pass a barter check. Easy Pete will give you dynamite if you pass an explosives check. It's nice to see in the very first quest the way your character build changes how other characters interact with you and enables you or prevents you from getting the better resolution to this first quest. And the battle that plays out can play out in a couple of different ways. Obviously, all the Powdergangers that attack the town will die, but none of these characters have plot armor. Everyone who participates in the gunfight is at risk of dying, and their chance of survival goes up if you enlist the help of as many people as possible, but it's not guaranteed. You could be helping the town of Goodsprings and Ringo can die. Trudy can definitely die. Sonny Smiles is a badass, but even she's not immune, just unlikely to die in that conflict. But if you decide to side with the Powdergangers against the town of Goodsprings, that is a viable route to take. And you can wipe out, well, basically everyone in town aside from the shopkeeper Chet. Everyone else is basically dead at that point. Even Joe Cobb has some dialogue checks you can pass. There is an intelligence check to convince him to take over the town, and a speech check to inquire about his backstory. It's just nice that your character build actually influences how the conversation goes. I like that a lot. And he will want you to deal with Ringo, and then he and his gang will attack the town. So we're going to do that right now.
That's close enough.
One of the things that I don't like about this quest is that you could lock yourself out of helping out Ringo. You could say, hey, maybe I can help.
I saw you being awfully friendly with Joe Cobb, so no thanks.
Oh, I got too far into the conversation with Joe Cobb, and now Ringo doesn't trust me, and there's no way to gain his trust. Even though I was just speaking up a big game to Joe Cobb, I wasn't actually planning to help him out, but I guess now I don't have an option. I'm being shoehorned in that direction. So, bit of a mark against this quest line. This is also the first time a player can learn about Caravan, the game within a game. This game is kind of a joke. A lot of players riff on it because it's not very well done, and most people don't take the time to learn its convoluted rule set. Triple Triad, this is not. There actually is some strategy to the game, and it is nice that the playing cards that you find littered around the world can be added to your deck, and the collectible things that you find do have some kind of actual purpose. The more cards you find, the more custom a deck you can build, and if you've got the right cards, you can make quick work of this game. But again, most players don't know about that because most players do not play the Caravan card game in the game. But yes, I have been locked out of Ghost Town Gunfight, and now I must help the Powdergangers by killing Ringo.
Shit!
One of the other reasons I don't like to help out the Powdergangers attacking the town of Goodsprings is because there's one doctor in town, and he will die in this gunfight, which means there will be no doctor in Goodsprings. There will be no Powderganger replacement doctor taking his spot. It'll just be a town without a doctor. And as we return to Joe Cobb, we see the Powdergangers are amassing here. Before we start the actual gunfight, he will give you a couple of optional objectives, and if you pass the skill checks, you can talk to Doc Mitchell, pass a medicine check, he'll give you some extra stims. You can bully Chet. A lot of options here based on your skill set. Not as many if you were helping out the town of Goodsprings. Bit less involved. So now we're ready to begin the gunfight. Regardless of whether you're helping out the Powdergangers or the town of Goodsprings, it will result in one faction becoming displeased with your actions. You will incur some negative reputational damage. Now, in the past, I have thought it's kind of lame that once this battle commences, that's kind of the end for Goodsprings and the Powdergangers. There is a little bit more you can do over at the correctional facility, but for the most part, Goodsprings is kind of done. and Joe Cobb's gang is also kinda done. Sometimes I just wish that there was more to Goodsprings or the Powder Ganger faction here, but I realize now that it's an intentional design choice that these two groups don't really have much of an effect long-term in the game. Goodsprings is a town where you're allowed to make mistakes. You can screw up, and it's okay. Like, if the town of Goodsprings gets pissed at you and chases you out, you never have to come back here again. And so the gunfight will break out, and one of the factions that he wiped out, hopefully the faction I've aligned myself with, it'd be awkward if the town of Goodsprings actually kills these Powder Gangers. This is not the best showing from the Powder Gangers today. So yeah, basically everyone in town is now dead. But the town of Goodsprings is wiped out, as well as all the Powder Gangers, so... Again, you're allowed to screw up. This is the town where you can make your mistakes, and lordy, I have really screwed the pooch on this one. But hey, we've leveled up, and we can start putting some skill points into various attributes. There you go. Just dump them into whatever you feel is most appropriate. And you get to choose a perk. So it's a bit of a weird system where you can level up every level up, but you can only choose a perk on even levels up, which is confusing. I don't think most new players would understand initially what's going on. It might have been a better system to allow every level up to grant you a perk, and maybe space out the level ups a bit further apart, but this is the system they have. And I like how not all the perks are available right out of the gate. As you can see, I currently only qualify for 7, and again, you gotta worry about giving the player choice paralysis, especially this early into the game before they've gotten invested in it yet. So, only having to choose from a few select ones, it's good. It's a good system. That being said, some of these perks are just stinkers. Some of them just aren't good. Like the retention perk, this one is bad. Very, very, very bad. It might have been able to be combined with a different magazine perk to make something good, but as it stands, it is just a very, very bad perk. There's also other bad perks like In Shining Armor. This one is infamous because it is bugged and doesn't actually work. I'm pretty sure that to this day, it has not been officially patched. No matter what platform you are on, this just does not work. There are mods out there that fix it, some balancing and bug fixing mods, but it's kind of embarrassing that this just doesn't actually do what it's supposed to do because of a coding error. Most of these options aren't bad. I do think the cannibal perk is kind of annoying because when you're trying to sneak and loot bodies, you have to go through an additional menu that always asks you if you want to eat them instead. So that could have been done a bit better. I feel like Educated could be designed a bit better too because it is strongest if you grab it at level 4. So if you ever plan on having the Educated perk, you probably want to grab it at level 4, which means your second perk of the game is kind of pre-selected for you. It's just a little too strong, and I feel like it could be reworked a bit better. There are a lot of perks that will be unlocked later on in the game. Some of them are kind of boring, like do 25% more damage with a specific type of firearm. Yeah, I'll consider taking it. It's not bad, but it's not necessarily interesting. The ones that are interesting are the ones that allow you to play the game in new and unique ways. Quick Draw, another really, really bad perk. Makes you holster and equip your weapon 50% faster. Wow. Terrifying Presence is a fairly disappointing perk. Half the time, it'll just end the conversation and initiate combat, which, if I wanted to engage in combat, I would have just started the fight. I didn't need a perk to do that. Other times, it ends the conversation and makes the enemy flee, which doesn't actually progress the quest, and it just kind of... It's awkward. It's not great. It definitely could have been done in a better manner. And I toyed around with this perk a while back, wherein instead of scaring people away, if you used a Terrifying Presence skill check on somebody, they wouldn't just cower and flee, they would be so scared that their heads would explode. And maybe that didn't make a lot of sense, but it was certainly a lot more interesting than what it is in the vanilla game.
I've got nothing left but the clothes on my back.
Looks like we'll have to take them by force.
Oh God, help! Help!
Overall, a wide smattering of perks that will be unlocked as you play through the game. Many of them are useful, many of them have their niche uses if nothing else, but some of them are bad. Some of them could definitely be reworked or removed entirely. Before we say goodbye to the town of Goodsprings, I wanted to show off some of the improvements I've been talking about. So I've gone back before everybody in town died and installed a few of the mods that I really do appreciate. There's a few more NPCs walking around, people to talk to, because people love adding stuff to Goodsprings, just making it more of a welcoming town. There's also the ability to sprint. That is a very nice addition, helps you get between locations faster. And it's not just the player. I've got a different mod on that allows NPCs to sprint, which makes some of the melee enemies a lot more deadly. Suddenly that legionary charging at you with a cleaver is more of a menacing threat you gotta watch out for. But down here we've got the repair shop. There's nobody in town who has the ability to repair your gear as far as I know. So the repair shop is a great addition. There are two characters that feel very much in line with the theming, and they've got the quest that I mentioned earlier that helps you improve the schoolhouse. You can turn it into player housing. And here is the schoolhouse. After a few minutes of cleaning up the garbage, mopping the floor, it's a lot more welcoming. I would definitely stay in this place as opposed to the last place, which had mantis corpses and garbage strewn about everywhere. This is a lot nicer. We've also got the new looting menu. So instead of having to manually open every object and looking inside to see what's inside, you can just look at them at a glance. Yep, there's some sunset sarsaparilla in there, fork in that dumpster, leather belt in there. It makes looking through things and scavenging a lot faster. Definitely a quality of life improvement. There's also a new person in Chet's shop. I actually created this person because I also thought it would be great if the town of Goodsprings had more basic quests. So this guy will actually send you on a small quest to go hunt some geckos, bring back pelts, and once you've done that, he'll show you how to make improved leather armor. He'll give you a recipe, and it's just one more way to entice the player to use the crafting system more. I'm not the only one who has added new characters to the town of Goodsprings. A lot of people have added their NPCs, they'll be walking around, and it's always nice to return to Goodsprings and having more friendly faces welcoming you, but it also means that when the gunfight breaks out between the Powder Gangers and the town of Goodsprings, the Powder Gangers are going to be... they're not going to stand a chance. It definitely breaks the balance of the first quest line, but I still like the idea of there being more people in the town of Goodsprings that you can talk to. So here is the ghoul character that I made named Wishman, who teaches you the 4 basic weapon safety rules, and he also tries to teach the player about the weapon mod mechanic, which is it's a bit more obscure and not as utilized. The weapon modification system became a lot more well developed in Fallout 4. It does exist in New Vegas, it's just not that great, but it does exist, and Wishman will tell you about it. I also thought it would be a great way to get new players introduced to the concept of ghouls, because not everybody played Fallout 3 and knows what a ghoul is, so this would be a nice solid first introduction, I thought. I actually programmed him with an excuse to not get involved in a gunfight. If you say the town's going to be attacked and we need your help, he just will refuse to participate and will flee before the fighting breaks out. And that's the way I thought that a character like that could be added to Goodsprings without breaking the balance of that first quest line. I also think these 2 characters here, added by the interesting NPCs mod, are great.
You out of your mind? NCI has guns, Frank. Guns.
There's more to war than guns.
What do you think? NCI or Legion?
I think this is a fun and welcoming way to get the player involved with the main conflict of the game without forcing it upon them.
I'm asking who'd win in a fight. I'm saying NCI hands down. This stubborn son of a bitch right here, he says Legion.
The only one stubborn here is you, Bill. Like how you won't let Doc Mitchell fix your nose.
Yeah, fun characters like that, talking about the NCR and Legion in a way that feels holistic. They're a welcome addition. I like them a lot. And so we say goodbye to the town of Goodsprings. Overall, a great starting location with a very strong starting quest. It welcomes the player in, introduces them to some of the conflicts, local and regional, and allows the player to express themselves by making choices that affect the fate of the town, and play around with some of the game's core mechanics to understand how to play the game. But now, let's talk a little bit about what I think is the biggest weakness for Fallout New Vegas. Over the years, I have talked with various members of the Fallout community, and the general consensus is that Fallout New Vegas is the better game compared to Fallout 3. It has stronger writing, more RPG elements, better designed quests, the combat is better, being able to aim down sights now. It's better in so many ways. So you can imagine my surprise when I talk to other people who say they actually prefer Fallout 3 to New Vegas. Either they preferred the bleak and haunting atmosphere of Fallout 3, or they preferred the dungeoneering, because those were two big draws to Fallout 3 that are absent in Fallout New Vegas. Fallout New Vegas is a lot warmer. There are a lot more towns to check out, a lot more people to talk to. A lot of the towns are very close by. You don't really get that sense of isolation and loneliness that was present in Fallout 3. And truthfully, even though Fallout New Vegas does have a lot of locations you can visit, they're usually occupied by people. There aren't a lot of abandoned buildings and dungeons you can check out. It doesn't feel like you're rooting through the abandoned corpse of America like it was in Fallout 3. People have started to rebuild. To rectify this issue, there is a mod I have installed called A World of Pain, and it adds basically 100 dungeons for you to explore throughout the entire Wasteland. So a couple more vaults, but even more than that, a couple of abandoned buildings here and there. As an example, down here where we fought the geckos in the first quest, we can now find an abandoned cigarette factory. Or the headquarters for the cigarette factory. I'm not sure they actually manufacture cigarettes in here or not. But that's the kind of thing we can find out. So there could be some tough enemies to find, but behind them, some strong loot, some ammunition, some collectibles, maybe some fun lore on the terminals or on some written logs. Who knows? There could be anything in here. And more locations like this I would definitely love to explore. It's a shame there weren't more of these in the vanilla game. So let's go back to what I was saying previously about how Fallout New Vegas lacked Fallout 3's hauntingly bleak atmosphere. I feel like a lot of that has to do with how populated Fallout New Vegas is. There are a lot of small settlements and towns all over the place, and they're all fairly close to each other. The jog from Goodsprings down to Prim is maybe a 2-minute saunter, and then another 2-minute jog to go south to the Mojave Outpost. This is also why I feel that Fallout New Vegas just can't work as a survival game. There's just too much civilization, so that surviving isn't that much of a challenge. Now, I have seen a mod for Fallout New Vegas that turned it into more of a survival game. That was called Fallout Dust. And the way that that mod turned this game into a proper survival game was generally by getting rid of all of the NPCs and all of their quests and all of the hub worlds and towns and all of the clean water. Basically, remove everything that makes Fallout New Vegas an RPG, and then you can have something that better resembles a survival game. Of course, if you do that, you're not really playing New Vegas, are you? You're not really playing an RPG anymore. But does that mean that Fallout New Vegas inherently cannot be a survival game? Well, probably not in its current form. I think the entire world space would need a bit of a rebuild. For instance, instead of being 2 minutes away from Goodsprings, imagine if Prim was closer to 20 minutes, a treacherous 20-minute walk from Goodsprings down to Prim. And you'd have to be prepared. You'd have to make sure you were properly hydrated, brought some spare water with you, some food. You had to make sure you were properly well rested. It would be important to make sure you had radiation supplies in case a radiation storm started to crop up while you were walking, or if you fell into the radiated river. There could be more hazardous animals along the stretch that could come and go as they please, so sometimes your expedition south to Prim might get rescheduled and postponed because you needed to wait for an animal to leave. Or maybe there's simply only one way down towards Prim, and you have to pay a powder ganger toll that you currently don't have the funds to pay. In that scenario, you can probably imagine that you would spend a fair amount of time in the town of Goodsprings and its surrounding areas. You would have more of an incentive to check out other landmarks nearby. Try and find more places like that abandoned cigarette facility, or go check out the Yangtze Memorial over there. See if you can't find a few more caves to find some loot inside to get stronger gear so you can fight those highwaymen. Or maybe you could find some loot that you could sell to the shopkeep so you could pay their toll. See if you can't turn that schoolhouse into a place with a few more amenities in case you decide to stay here for an even more prolonged period of time. And that's how it all ties together. If there were more random dungeons and locations for you to explore and loot, and if the towns were further stretched apart, then you could play this game as more of a survival game. The journey down to Prim wouldn't just be something that's a given, it would have to be an expedition that you prepare for. Same thing for a further expedition from Prim down to the Mojave Outpost, and then around up to Novak. And of course, if none of that interests you, if you're not really into a survival mode for this game, then of course you wouldn't have to worry about hunger or thirst or exhaustion. If you get caught in bad weather, you can just fast travel back to safety. And if you are interested in skipping these now long and arduous treks from one town to another, perhaps you could join up with a caravan, and they would skip you to the next town for a small price. That is how Fallout New Vegas could be reimagined as a proper survival mode. It wouldn't be for everyone, and I'm sure there would be plenty more kinks to work out. But if you were interested in playing Fallout New Vegas as a survival game, I think that would have to be the framework that you work with. But Fallout New Vegas is really not a survival game, and most people don't play it as one. So, as of right now, that's just a thought experiment about what Fallout New Vegas could be or could have been at one point. So, back to the game we actually have. Fallout New Vegas. It's a game that gives you a lot of freedom in how you deal with each faction, and that'll be reflected in the new reputation system. Yes, long gone are the days of a simplistic binary karma system, wherein you earn good points for doing good things, and get bad points for doing bad things. Technically, the karma system does still exist for Fallout New Vegas, but its presence is severely reduced, hardly shows up at all, and honestly, that's for the best. It's not a very great system. For instance, you can earn positive karma by helping out some of the powder gangers, for instance, giving boxcars, the injured powder ganger, some painkillers, but killing that same powder ganger will give you good karma as well. Doesn't make a lot of sense. In fact, if a player wants to raise their karma levels quickly for whatever reason, the best way to do that is to go on a powder ganger killing spree. Just start killing folks. It's what Jesus would have wanted, right? So the karma system just outright sucks. But the reputation system that New Vegas introduced is so much better. Individual groups in the Wasteland will keep track of how many times you've helped them out or hurt them, and although you can do good things for people to improve your reputation with them, it won't make them forget about the harm you've caused them. Doing a mix of generous and horrible things will lead to the player being branded as unpredictable, a crazy person, as they should be. And earning a poor reputation with a faction will lead to more hostilities and fewer chances to associate with them. The reputation system does a good job of showing off that there are consequences for your actions. For instance, helping the town of Goodsprings fend off the powder ganger attack will likely result in the powder gangers beginning to hate you. Some of them may start attacking you on sight, and the powder ganger leader here at the correctional facility will not allow you to start their factional quest. But if you instead helped the powder gangers attack Goodsprings, then some of them will be friendlier. They won't charge you a cover fee to enter their base, their merchants will offer better prices, and if they really like you, they'll give you some extra dynamite from time to time. So the powder ganger quest is pretty short, but it's okay. Their tasks can be completed in multiple ways, some options are tied to skill checks, so different players will have different options to choose from. And despite being a minor faction, this quest also has two different endings, either by assisting or betraying the gang during an assault by NCR forces. And that's pretty much where the powder ganger content ends. There's not much beyond that. For a glimpse at how a quest like this could be expanded upon, there are a few mods that add a bit more substance to it. One of them introduces an option to betray the gang while also sparing some of its nicer members. There's a powder ganger that's a medic and another one that's a trader, and they can be convinced to abandon the area, and they'll relocate to a different location. So some of the least bad powder gangers get a second chance. The same mod also adds a credible reason for a player role-playing as a good guy to start this quest line in the first place, by adding a character who asks you to investigate them and do some busy work for them to gain their trust. It's something so simple, I can't believe it wasn't part of the vanilla game. And once you're done with Goodsprings and the correctional facility, it's time to move on. But there are some impassable mountains to the west, so you can't go that way. Some borderline impassable roads to the north, you got some treacherous animals blocking your path. And there are even more mountains to the east, so you're generally gonna be funneled south towards the town of Prim and the Mojave Outpost. That's by design. And again, you'll see some powder gangers hanging out near the road. They don't really attack you much though, even though they've got some encampments, and it looks like they might start shaking you down if you get too close or harassing you. They will, for the most part, leave you alone. Which gave me the idea to create a character who actually does harass you.
Hey, you can't just walk around here with reckless abandon. Don't you know your footprints are putting a strain on our roads?
So this is a character I added a while back because I thought it would make sense that the powder gangers would start harassing people walking down the roads that they control. There are a couple of different skill checks you could use to convince him to grant you passage, but in particular, I want to point out that his charisma and strength checks are specifically designed to not let you know beforehand whether or not you will meet the criteria to pass. This is in direct contrast to the way that New Vegas normally handles skill checks like this, where you are specifically told the exact requirements to pass, and any skill checks that you currently cannot pass are flagged in red. And that kind of skill check system is fine, but it has its drawbacks. For instance, passing a vanilla skill check almost always leads to a good outcome, and when a player realizes this, they stop considering the other options. They just always go for the option that is the win button. So giving a skill check a chance to fail adds some risk back into the equation. Also, sometimes failing a skill check in the vanilla game results in the person you're talking to going hostile and attacking you, which feels like a punishment. This means that the player will be conditioned to learn that failing skill checks is a bad thing, and they'll never do it, which is a shame because sometimes failing a skill check is kind of funny. But I'm too pretty to pay a toll.
No, I'm pretty sure you've got a face only a mother could love. 100 caps.
So for this powder ganger's dialogue, your ability to pass a skill check is hidden, which means you won't know it'll work until you try it, which I think is fun. I think it's a better system, although I don't know if it's compatible with the stat boosting consumables. If you don't know how many speech points you need to pass a speech check, then you don't know if reading a speech magazine will help you out with that. My point is that there are a couple different ways a game could handle skill checks, and none of them are inherently better, but they each have their own strengths and weaknesses. I also made it so that after talking to him, he will tell you about the correctional facility, so in case you didn't know where it was, he'll add it to your map and you'll be able to figure out where it is, and go there and do the Powder Ganger quest line, if you were so interested. Continuing south, we find the town of Prim. It's a small location with not a lot of substance. There's evidence in the game files that this place was supposed to have more content, but they went unused due to technical issues and limitations. What we're ultimately left with is 2 buildings and a single quest shared between them. The town itself is patrolled by permanently hostile escaped convicts, which are powder gangers, except not powder gangers. It's a very confusing place, because even if you have maximum affinity with the powder gangers, if your reputation with them is at its maximum, they'll still attack you on sight. They will also ignore powder ganger factional armor, preventing you from slipping past them in disguise. Honestly, the whole thing is kind of badly designed. The game does such a good job at establishing the factional reputation system, and then immediately undercuts it by having this powder ganger faction not respond to the reputation system at all. A couple of modders have tried their hand at improving this area of the game. Marking the powder gangers as part of the proper faction is a simple fix that allows a disguise to work on them. giving you a chance to complete this quest without directly killing any of them, although they still won't respond to high factional reputation, which is a shame.
Hey, you. This is Powder Ganger turf. Are you fixing to get shot?
For my part, I took it a step further by adding a Powderganger NPC that will meet you at the entrance and discourages you from entering the town and getting shot. If you continue to talk with him, he'll give you a different quest to eliminate potential sheriffs, which will help the Powdergangers solidify control of the town. As for the town itself, there are a few mods that add more buildings to explore, a commercial district, a couple more fun places to explore, poke around, learn about the town, the citizens that lived here. A lot of good stuff. There's a lot of good stuff that can be added. There's also a mod that allows you to rebuild the Bison Steve after you've cleared it out and turn it into a functioning casino that will compete with the Vicky and Vance across the road. Taking the time to do so doesn't just give you more things to do and establish player housing, but also grants you a consistent passive income, as you will earn a portion of the casino's profits. Or if you didn't want to fix up that casino, you can just stay here at the rest house that was added by a different mod. So, yeah, there's definitely a lot of things you can do to this town to make it more welcoming. And I'm sure the developers would have done so if they had the time and didn't have to deal with the technical difficulties. Continuing south down the road will bring us towards the Mojave Outpost, but first we'll pass by the Nevada Highway Patrol Station, which has been taken over by a group of raiders called the Jackals. It reminds me of an aspect from Fallout 3 that wasn't quite continued, which is the random encounter system.
Hello there. It's good to see a friendly face. I almost took you for a raider, I did.
What impeccable timing. So yeah, the random encounter system, which is something that was quite prolific in Fallout 3, but didn't get continued, unfortunately, for this game, which is a real shame. In Fallout 3, one of the first things that I tended to do was go to the supermarket and retrieve some food and medical supplies. But every time I did that, there would always be a random chance encounter. Something unpredictable would be happening outside the doors to the supermarket. Sometimes I would find two factions fighting over a few bottles of clean water. Sometimes a thug would try to mug me. And if I was exceptionally unlucky, I might encounter some powerful and aggressive wildlife, including a chance for a deathclaw to show up. These events were all randomly generated and scattered throughout the entire Wasteland, which meant I never truly knew what was going to happen. Fallout New Vegas doesn't really have that. Almost every encounter in the game is scripted, and I can quite accurately predict what hazards I'm going to encounter every time, because it's always the same in every playthrough. The only thing I can't predict is when Malcolm Holmes is going to show up and force greet me. That's the only thing that still feels truly random. And you know, I miss that random encounter system. It was fun to be surprised by the unpredictable. And it also meant that, because I wouldn't necessarily see every random encounter in a single playthrough, I would get to discover new events every time I played the game. There are a few mods out there that add encounters similar to that, although they tend to be pretty simple, dropping in a few hostile enemies like raiders or super mutants, and that's fine, but I do miss some of the more complex encounters that would tell a story or showcase the consequences of your actions. For Fallout New Vegas, perhaps we could have encounters like maybe we'd occasionally come across Sunny Smiles, who's been hunting geckos, now that the town is better protected from Powdergangers. Or maybe we could be ambushed by Powderganger hit squads if I made myself their enemy. Fun fact, there is a Powderganger ambush event that does exist in the game, but it's a scripted encounter and not a random one, and it only happens in a few specific areas of the map.
You shouldn't have crossed the Powdergangers. Now you're going to pay.
But imagine if it could happen outside of Nipton, or one of the rest stops near the Mojave Outpost. Imagine if you didn't know that there were exactly 5 Jackal gang members at the highway patrol station. Maybe sometimes it's empty, maybe sometimes there's a rat infestation instead. My point is that New Vegas lacks the chaotic randomness that Fallout 3 had, and more unpredictability would be welcome. And so we continue south toward the Mojave Outpost. The outpost is a simple location with 1 or 2 minor quests and a vendor. Ranger Jackson will ask you to kill the giant ants that plague the road to the north. And as you can see, there aren't any ants on our way down there. They only spawn after talking to him, which is kind of lame. I feel like it would have been nice if they were here from the start, and you could either go around them if they were too difficult for you, or kill them and then you wouldn't have to backtrack. That would have been nice. There's also a small quest to investigate the town of Nipton and report back. Other folks have modded in people to talk to and stuff to do, like this quest that I added, where you help a trooper track down his missing playing cards.
Turn my back for 1 minute.
This quest also doubles as a very quick and dirty tutorial for Caravan, since the game never really gives you a great tutorial. Other mods have added more characters.
What do you think of our little slice of hell we got here?
And there are a few more interactions you can find with the Interesting NPCs mod, and even more added by the Encounters of the Mojave mod.
The raiders are holding their position down at Ivanpah. Coleman's been wounded in the assault, but the squad made it back alive.
Since there's also a shooting range back here now, I'd like to talk a little bit about the weapons and combat, which aren't really the parts of the game that I super care about, but yeah, the game comes with a decent variety of weapons, a wide array of firearms that are all fun to use, and not just firearms, there's a fair amount of melee and unarmed implements as well. Obviously, the textures and animations on them all are a bit dated, so I like to use mods that improve those aspects. I also really like this weapon holstering animation. It's fun. I like a little flourish from time to time. Imagine if different players could have different holstering animations depending on their character build. That could be a fun little Easter egg for characters that spec into high agility. Fun little surprise on maybe your third playthrough when you've hyper-specialized in a couple of aspects. I like the quick select menu. It's quite nice and very fast and responsive, although there's only 7 slots. There's the 8th slot that's taken up by the ability to swap ammos on the fly, which is a fun gimmick, but 7 slots is not a lot. I think I like Fallout 4's quick select a bit more because you've got 12 at the very least. That's something more to work with. Especially because there's no grenade hotkey in this game, so 1 or 2 of them might be assigned the grenade key. It's a little limited, but it's still decent. It gets the job done. Yeah, I actually do like the combat in this game. It might not seem like it because I praise quests that give non-violent solutions, but it's fun sometimes to whip out a pistol or a shotgun and start shooting things. And of course, there are plenty of mods out there that add new weapons, and some of those weapons are great, they're a lot of fun. Some of them are a bit gimmicky, but you can still get a laugh out of them. Some of them have amazing textures and animations that put the vanilla games to shame, and others themselves don't quite live up to the vanilla game's standards, but it's fun to see what people come up with. This game has weapon degradation, which is normally not a system I enjoy, but for this game, it feels like it works. I don't hate it. As a weapon deteriorates in this game, it becomes gradually less effective. It will jam more frequently, resulting in longer reload animations. That gives you plenty of advance warning that you need to find a repairman, or a repair kit, or a similar gun to harvest for parts. But it's only when I go on long trips that involve lots of combat, say exploring a ghoul-infested vault or something, that weapon degradation even starts to look like an issue. Of course, that's my personal opinion, one that won't necessarily be shared by everyone. And in an era where so many games allow you to customize different aspects of gameplay, it would be nice if there were an option to disable weapon and armor degradation for those who don't like it. But there isn't. So we make do with mods instead. There are mods out there that will do that for you. And finally, there is the VATS targeting system, wherein you can pause time during combat and select individuals to attack and which body parts you want to target. I've been dismissive of this mechanic in the past. I felt like it made the experience a bit too easy, and the ability to spam the VATS button to detect threats nearby meant that I usually wasn't surprised by enemy ambushes. However, I've grown to appreciate the mechanic more over time. Not only does it serve to make Fallout feel unique, but it also feels like a way to increase accessibility for those who might not be so good at fast-paced video games. It also makes things easier for people who choose to play this game with a controller. where quickly placing a crosshair over an enemy can be a bit more difficult. It's a good system, and I'm glad it's in this game. There are mods that play around with the mechanic, replacing the ability to freeze time with a slow time ability, more akin to a cinematic bullet time mode. And that's fun to play around with. I'm sure some people prefer it even, but it's not for everyone. Heading east from the Mojave outpost, there is a predictable encounter with some raiders, as well as a scripted event of two people fighting over Blue Star bottle caps. This part is at least a little randomized, because sometimes Thomas will win, and other times Jacqueline will win.
Did you see that? That guy was gonna kill me.
It's also one of the few instances where passing a skill check successfully isn't the best choice, as showing off your intelligence will immediately make her hostile.
Well, I guess you're just too smart for me. Unfortunately, I can't leave any witnesses behind.
And so we make it to the burned town of Nipton. We'll probably kill Oliver Swanwick, and we'll get introduced to the other major faction whose influence permeates through the entire game, the Legion. And what an introduction they make. You walk into town, and you see the burned pile of tires. Take a left, and you see all these crucified powder gangers, and a scorpion. That's not normally there. That's a bit of randomness. All the bodies up on the crosses here, too. Crucified powder gangers. And a bunch of strange men just waiting for you to approach them. Upon talking to the Legionary here, they'll give you the first Legion quest of the game. And one of the few quests you'll get from the Legion that doesn't include outright murdering people. They want you to pass word of their atrocities to the NCR, which you were probably already going to do anyway, if you agreed to do the NCR quest to investigate this town and report back. We'll see more of the Legion later, but for now we can check what's left in the ruins of this town. The answer is, not much. You can check out a few unburned houses to get a peek into what the townsfolk were like before they all died. You can explore City Hall and learn about the mayor's corruption. You can also visit the general store, where a single powder ganger remains alive. You can also visit the world's crappiest hotel that doesn't have any rooms or beds. In this case, I've found an NCR trooper who's been hiding out from the Legion attacks. They're a field medic, and they've got the ability to safely remove powder gangers off the cross without killing them. So that's a nice change, being able to do that. There's also a mod that lets you refurbish Nipton and rebuild City Hall, become the mayor, and try and fix up this place a bit. But in the end, Nipton is pretty much just a ghost town, and most players won't be sticking around too long. If you talked to the powder ganger in the Nipton General Store, he will start a quest to retrieve a couple of abducted powder gangers from the Legion. And by default, there's really only one resolution to this quest. You free the powder gangers. Maybe the Legion goes hostile. I can't remember if that's the case or not. But yeah, there's just one way to resolve that little minor quest, so I added an alternate solution, where if you talk to this Legionary, he's kind of gotten fed up with these captives, but he's not allowed to kill them, because his goal is to bring them back, but he asks you to kill them. It's a weird, convoluted scenario, but I think it's kind of fun. It gives you a different way to resolve this quest. If you don't care about the powder gangers and want to get on the Legion's good side, then that's a way to handle it.
Nicely done. It's easy to kill men whose wrists have been bound, but you did us a favor.
The road east will lead to the abandoned town of Searchlight, another location affected by the horrors of the Legion attacks. The NCR soldiers patrolling nearby will give you a minor task to retrieve dog tags, and that'll lead you to a non-feral, ghoulified trooper. And there's actually a couple different ways you can deal with that character, which I appreciate. There's also another quest you can do in this town. It's easily missed. There's a prospector down here named Logan. He and his crew are... Oh, fuck me! He and his crew are looking to scavenge the ruins of this town, and they need your assistance to do so. It's a pretty fun quest, although admittedly it's also kind of linear and always ends with Logan betraying you. And it would have been nice if there were additional options, either to intimidate him into standing down, or persuade him to leave you alone, but there isn't, and that's a shame. There's also an airport south of Searchlight that doesn't have much going on. I've seen a couple different mods try and turn it into something more interesting, usually by having NCR or Legion troopers vying to control it, but as it stands, there's not much going on with that location either. The radiation and the gunfire and the ghouls usually dissuade people from coming this way, but if you persist, you'll finally reach the Legion outpost at Cottonwood Cove. It's the only major Legion location on this side of the Colorado River, and one of the few Legion outposts in the entire game, actually. The development of Fallout New Vegas was notoriously rushed, so despite them being a big part of the game, we don't actually get much Legion content. One of the first things you notice as you approach the town is a Great Khan who has been lashed to a cross. You can remove him, but only if you've already visited the Khans to the northeast and started a quest for them, which is oddly restrictive. It would be nice to have the option to save him as soon as you see him, simply because it's the nice thing to do. And I can, because I have mods on that allow me to do that. You're welcome. And for the rest of Cottonwood Cove, there aren't very many things to do. You can free some slaves, either by buying their freedom or breaking them free, or if you're feeling malicious, you can detonate their collars and kill them. That's pretty much it, though. There's also one big thing you can do, which is to release a bunch of radioactive barrels stored in a truck above the canyon and kill everyone here. So not really a quest you can do for the Legion, as it is a quest you can do to them. Obviously, if any mod is going to add more Legion content, it usually adds it to this location. I myself have added a few characters that give the players more things to do. A poison maker, who will give the player a bounty to kill, and also teaches them the niche mechanic of applying poisons to melee weapons. I also added a legionary in this building who will give you a lot more information about the Legion as a whole, and try to paint them with a bit more of a sympathetic brush. There are also additional encounters added by other mods, so you can eavesdrop on conversations. Of course, Cottonwood Cove is not the only place that Legion content can get added to. You can find legionaries all over the place. New forward operating base, new forts for them to occupy, and with each location, perhaps more quests to do. It's not uncommon for me to see NCR soldiers and legionaries skirmishing as I walk past their battles on the road. There's also the Dry Wells Legion expansion mod, which opens up the Dry Wells location to the southwest, and gives the players more options to interact with that location outside of nuking it and scavenging it for ruins, which is the only option you had by default. And for more Legion content, there's the Retribution mod, which adds a number of quests and characters to Cottonwood Cove, which I found quite enjoyable. Quite honestly, I'm happy to see any mod that adds more Legion content to compensate for how little ended up being in the vanilla game. And many of these modded quests also offer players who are aligned with the NCR the opportunity to infiltrate and sabotage from within, which is always fun. Next, we head up to one of my favorite towns, Novak, named after the no vacancy sign out front that has conveniently burned out identically on both sides of the sign. Novak is a great place to establish as your player home. It's centrally located. The home you can purchase is adjacent to the fast travel point, so you fast travel in and you can immediately be in your home. There's a vendor and a doctor in town, and 2 snipers that are protecting the town from any threats. And there's a fair amount of quests available too. Some of them are fairly minor tasks, like helping out the McBride family with their dead cows. And of course, there's the big quest to clear out the ghouls at the Repcon facility. That's a very well done quest. I have no notes on that one. It's just great. A lot of options to roleplay, a couple different endings. It's good. It's very good. There's also another quest you can get from the sniper Boone, and he will ask you to figure out which citizen has been working with the Legion. That one is pretty good, although it lacks in some aspects. It's frustrating that once you find out who the guilty party is, you can't confront them with the evidence that you find. Like, you find the evidence that they're guilty, but there's no way to talk to them about it. That kind of sucks. Feels like a missed opportunity. I would have liked an alternate ending to that quest where you bring the guilty party to justice without killing them, which is an option that would boost your reputation with the town at the cost of maybe losing Boone's trust, or making it a little harder to gain his trust and gain his personal quest. It would also be cool if evil players had the option to blackmail her into continuing to work with the Legion before they frame the local NCR ranger that's staying in one of the bungalows. I could think of a couple different ways that quest could have played out if it wasn't so linear. Speaking of the NCR soldiers in town, let's briefly discuss the recruitable companions in this game. They are definitely improvement over the blank slate meat shields from Fallout 3. These characters have a lot more to say and are much better developed, with many of them having their own personal quests you can assist with. Arcade, Boone, Cassidy, and Veronica, all top-tier companions. Raul is great too, although his personal quest isn't very good. Basically, it boils down to him trauma dumping on you a couple of times. It could be improved. There's also Lily the Nightkin super mutant, who could be improved a bit more. It's fun to bring her around to various locations and freak out the locals, but she notably has much fewer things to say compared to other companions. Which is a shame because she's got a very interesting backstory, and I would love to hear her talk some more about being in the Master's Army and all that. Spaced out, of course, don't trauma dump on me like Raul does. Rex and Eddie are fine robot companions, although I think it would be fun to be able to upgrade them in different ways. It would be nice to customize Eddie, because not everyone appreciates the audio that it plays every single time it encounters an enemy. So it would be nice if you could reprogram it with different options, or program it to be silent entirely. Which you can do with mods, but it'd be nice if that were a vanilla option. I also don't much care for Eddie's constant beeping and booping, can't speak in English, which is a shame since it can clearly play audio clips from old TV shows, so it would be nice if it mixed and matched them, you kind of mash up and try to communicate with garbled old clips. That'd be a fun concept. And I've seen that concept actually developed on for the brief time I spent in Fallout 76. There was an iBot I could talk to that did that exact thing that I've talked about. But Eddie does not have that ability, so kind of a missed opportunity there. And there are hundreds, if not thousands, of additional companions that modders have added to this game over the years. So many that I don't really have time to go through all of them. But a lot of them are fun and funny, and many of them are so well designed that they integrate seamlessly into the game as if they were vanilla. But I do think that by default, there's a distinct lack of Legion sympathetic companions. Some mods take existing Legion characters from the vanilla game and turn them into companions. Vulpes and Kulta, Ulysses, and Joshua Graham are popular options. But one of the ones I was most impressed by was Achilles of Atlanta from the mod Caesar's New Regime. I liked that one a lot. I liked how you could talk to him and you can go back and forth debating the morality and practicality of the Legion's actions. It's probably as good as you're going to get. I haven't found a Legion companion that really blows my mind, but maybe one day. I have a whole tier list I made dedicated to talking about the companions in this game, both the vanilla ones and all the modded ones that I've used over the years, so if you want a further discussion on that topic, you can consult that video. I'll link it in the video description. But let's head east from Novak, and we'll make our way to Nelson, the Legion outpost at Nelson, and the NCR camp at Forlorn Hope that lies just a little bit beyond that. The area between Forlorn Hope and Nelson is usually pretty quiet, bit of a no man's land, but with mods it becomes more of a hot zone. You could also sometimes find injured troopers on the ground, which is kind of horrifying.
Kill me!
Oh, and of course, this whole place is dangerous. It's not the kind of place you want to linger, really.
That's it. Run away.
When you do make it to Camp Forlorn Hope, the NCR does have a few quests you can do, although the big one in the command tent is a real slog. The person operating the radio will want you to go visit a few ranger stations nearby to bring them new security codes, and by nearby, I mean they're scattered to the 7 corners of the world, and they're really tedious to get to. And then once you've done all that and come back, she'll send you back out to 3 of them to investigate suspected sabotage. There's a lot of bouncing back and forth with that quest, and if it weren't for fast travel, it would be borderline unplayable. At the very least, it would have been nice if you could investigate the sabotage while you were updating the code frequencies to reduce the amount of backtracking you would have to do. The one good thing about that quest is that it finishes really strong. It takes you to Camp Gulf, introduces you to Chief Hanlon, and then it asks you to make a difficult choice with no obviously best answer. It finishes strong. It's not the best quest, but it finishes strong. Other than that, there are quests where you can help the NCR find missing supplies, retrieve a lost shipment, use your medicine skill to heal some injured troopers, and ultimately lead an assault on the Legion outpost at Nelson. And depending on how much stuff you've done here, how strong the morale is, the better armed and prepared the troopers will be when they attack. For the final assault, I would have liked an option to involve the nearby Ranger Milo. He's an NCR soldier nearby who's got his own little quest to attack the Legion, so it would have been nice to coordinate an assault with him, but overall, I think Camp Forlorn Hope has a great sequence of quests. The Legion counterpart at Nelson, however, is much weaker. They basically just ask you to go kill everyone at Forlorn Hope on their behalf, and that's it. It would have been nice if you could work alongside the Legion, help them improve their defenses, or gather intelligence or something. Perhaps the leader could have given you instructions to infiltrate Forlorn Hope and do parts of the NCR questline, but intentionally do a bad job so that the NCR assault on Nelson fails. That would have been a lot of fun. The Legion Quest's expanded mod does a little bit more to improve the faction, allowing you to lead an assault by Legion forces on Forlorn Hope instead of doing it by yourself single-handedly. And it also gives you an additional option for dealing with Chief Hanlon, which I found very fun.
Isn't it glorious?
On the road south of Nelson, you will find a very simple quest you can do for an NCR soldier. He asks you to go investigate Tachetacup mines, go in, kill some legionaries, and free some of the captured troopers. It is a very bare-bones quest with no way to complete it other than to kill the legionaries or kill the troopers. So here's a few ideas that I thought could have been implemented. 1. Inform the Legion about this NCR soldier nearby and then capture him. 2. Staging a false alert that causes the legionaries to leave the area so you can free the soldiers. 3. Find a back exit to the cave. 4. Barter for their release. 5. Smuggle in some Legion uniforms so the troopers can walk out undercover. 6. Smuggling some stealth boys in so you can give them to the troopers and they can walk out undetected. 7. Putting on a Centurion's uniform and convincing the legionaries to transfer the soldiers to your control. 8. Puncturing the barrels that contain radioactive debris down there to kill the legionaries with radiation poisoning. And that's just a couple of ideas I had on how this quest could have been developed into something a bit more substantial. As it stands, it's not a very interesting quest, and I don't even think most people have even done it because it's kind of tucked away south of Nelson. Following the road north of Novak, there is Helios 1. That's a fun little location with a great quest. Great quest. No notes. The quest at Helios 1 is very well done. I like it a lot. I can't really think of a whole lot of ways to improve upon it. Up there beyond Helios 1 is Black Mountain Radio. That's another fun location. A lot of combat with some of the Nightkin up there, although you could sidestep some of it, some ways to shortcut your way up there. And there are a few different ways it can end, so yeah, great quest. Continuing north, we'll encounter Boulder City, the ruins of a destroyed town. That's where you can meet some great cons. They're holed up and trying to evade capture from the NCR. Multiple ways to settle that conflict as well, although perhaps a bit too easy to convince the NCR lieutenant to disobey direct orders from his superiors. That's a bit strange, but overall, good location. Well, not a great location. It's a pretty destroyed wreck of a place, but it's got a good quest. Or rather, a short leg of the main quest. Then we've got the 188 up here, the trading post. No quests, but plenty of vendors, a companion you can recruit, and a bed you can sleep in. And, of course, there are mods that add a few more people to talk to in the area. It may be even a few more quests you can do. But in the vanilla game, it's just kind of a location you can stop by, buy a few things, and keep on moving on. Further down the road, we have the Grub and Gulp. Again, not a whole lot going on here, but we can do some trading and resting up if we need to. Got some beds, got some vendors. It's okay. We're finally getting closer to the city of Vegas, but first we've got the Aerotech Office Park here. It's a small NCR outpost with very little going on. It does have a pretty good quest, the Coyotes quest line. It's about 2 scumbags that have been selling people to the fiends as slaves. And there's a couple ways to sleuth out that information, and 1 or 2 ways to bring them to justice. It's pretty good, although I would have appreciated a Legion-friendly option that perhaps bullied them into working with the Legion instead. That might have been fun. There's another NCR location that's a bit more noteworthy over here, Camp McCarran. It is home to a lot of great quests. 3-Card Bounty is a short but fun bounty hunting quest where you go after some fiends. There is some cut content that shows you could have talked to the bounty targets at one point in development, but they're always hostile on site in the final version of the game, which is unfortunate. There's also another bounty quest to go after a 4th fiend, Motor Runner, and I'm glad you do get the opportunity to speak to that one. There's another quest to root out a Legion spy, that's a lot of fun, and you could even complete it in an underhanded way for the Legion as well. It is a great quest, although a little buggy, I would know as I got soft locked out of it during my first playthrough. But for the most part, it's really fun. There's also a Legion soldier who's being interrogated, lots of ways to interact with that quest, and then there's the quest you get from Doc Hildern that'll send you to Vault 22. That's a tough mission, but also has a lot of great role-playing opportunities, and the vault itself is just so damn cool to explore, one of the most interesting and visually captivating locations with a great story behind it to uncover. And then there's the quest with Contreras that's actually quite involved, despite it being an unmarked quest, multiple ways to roleplay with it, and a couple different endings. And finally, there's the Whitewash quest, about an up-and-coming corporal who has gone missing. It's another great quest, although many people miss it because of how the dialogue options are set up when talking to the quest giver. The dialogue is just nested weirdly and it's easy to miss it. Still, it's a well-constructed quest with many ways to resolve it, and a bit of a moral dilemma. The only quest I feel could use some work would probably be the one involving Corporal Betsy. It's not bad for a premise, convincing a soldier to seek treatment for her mental trauma. It's just not presented very well, with all of her fellow soldiers and the commanding officer disregarding her privacy and talking to a random passerby about all the horrible experiences she's had. Like, hey, Lieutenant Gorobets, is something wrong with your soldier there? Yeah, she's behaving inappropriately ever since she got sexually assaulted. But this isn't the kind of thing you should be discussing with a gun for hire. That aside, it's also kind of a boring quest. You use your speech skill, or medicine skill, or being way too nosy skill, and you convince her to go to the doctor. The end. Honestly, the unmarked quest with Contreras had a bit more substance to it.
This is a military headquarters. You know, for soldiers? What's a civilian doing here?
I always thought it was strange that you could just walk right into the NCR's main base and no one would challenge you, regardless of your reputation level, so I added somebody who does that. Somebody who offers the bare minimum of resistance when walking into the main location of one of the major factions.
Sightseeing at a sensitive military outpost? You serious?
Before I forget, I should also mention the quest you get from the NCR sharecropper farm outside the gate. It involves purifying the contaminated water supply that's been hurting the crops. The quest takes you down into Vault 34, and it's really tough, but fun to complete. And the final leg of the quest presents an interesting moral dilemma, but not presented all that well. Like most people, I didn't even realize I was making a moral choice the first time I did it, because I wasn't thoroughly reading the terminals. So I didn't realize that some of my actions were having unintended consequences. But still, it's a solid quest. Leaving McCarran and heading north, you'll find the Crimson Caravan Company and New Vegas Medical Clinic. Aside from getting some implants that'll increase your attributes, there isn't much of note here at the medical clinic. Although there are mods that give you more to do, like this quest from New Vegas Stories that asks you to handle a delicate matter with a sick radioactive ghoul.
I got it, Doc. Where else can I go?
The Crimson Caravan location has a bit more for you to do, mostly handed out by Alice McLafferty. Some of the tasks are incredibly simple, like disabling a counterfeit bottle cap press. That one's fairly lackluster, and you can't even make bootleg bottle caps for fun. So that's a little disappointing. Some of the other quests she gives you are a bit more interesting, but outside of the work she gives you, there, again, isn't much else to do in this area. But now it's time for us to enter the greater New Vegas area, with our first stop at the District of Freeside. And there's a lot to talk about here. The area ended up being divided into multiple sections, and there aren't many people walking around, despite it supposedly being an overpopulated slum. Of course, there are numerous mods out there that try to rectify the situation, and if you use them all at once, let me tell you, things get really chaotic and buggy. Oh, this is broken as fuck, isn't it? That's not right. Rotface is one of the first characters you can meet. He's got a cut quest wherein he uses the caps you give him to buy himself nicer and nicer clothes. And his ultimate fate would have varied wildly depending on what you told him. And there are a couple of mods that try to recreate this quest, so that's nice. Then there's the Mormon Fort, where Julie Farkas will have a few minor tasks for you to do, 2 unmarked quests to help some locals, and that's pretty much it. The Atomic Wrangler Casino is a fun location with 2 great quests. It's a nice place to stay the night, and there are a few mods that perk it up a bit. The only note I have for this location is that one of the quests tasks you to find Cerulean Robotics, and that building is kind of tough to locate due to how Freeside is laid out. If you're not familiar with the layout of the town, and you don't know that Cerulean Robotics is on the other side behind a different building, it might seem like your waypoint was broken, which is how I felt the first time I tried to do this quest, and it took forever to find it. The Silver Rush has a fun quest line, although I would like to suggest 2 changes. First, it would be nice to complete it without killing Cass, which is only possible with some mods active. Normally, by default, she dies if you try to do the quest. Some of the mods have you bring her hat as proof of death, and others just have you pass a speech check to spare her. And either way, it's nice to have the option to keep her alive. Secondly, the finale of the questline ends with a surprise attack on the Legion, which Legion-aligned players will understandably not be happy about. Would have been nice if you told me I was working against the Legion's interests when I agreed to work for you. So a mod that enables you to stab her in the back and finish the quest on behalf of the Legion instead is a nice change. Also, the small cutscene that plays out when you first walk into the building was originally supposed to be a bit longer. Thanks to mods, I was able to see what it actually looked like, and it's a shame it got cut down. I understand why, though. It does drag on for a bit, but it's still pretty cool, and it gives a bit more insight into Gloria's character. The Kings have a great questline as well, with a couple of branching paths, the ability to open up new options for other quests. It's really great. It's a shame they don't play the actual Elvis Presley music, but the licensing costs would probably be unreasonably expensive. Still, you could have come up with at least one original song that mimics the style. Well, maybe you couldn't have. Again, development was a bit rushed. There are a few more minor encounters here and there, but that's Freeside, a really cool location with a lot of fun places to visit and things to do. And as always, there are mods that expand the area and develop it a bit more, adding more businesses and locals, and making it feel like a overpopulated slum, as it should be. And those are a lot of fun. It's great to see what this place could look like if there was more time and effort dedicated to it. Over here in the district of Westside, there are a few more places to visit, like the pawn shop, co-op, and the bordello. It's also where some of the NCR's quests take place. And we get a peek into how the incursion of NCR is taking a toll on the locals, which I think is very important. It shows that the NCR isn't strictly a force of good for the area. So not a lot of quests here, but you can also visit the Thorn, the fighting arena in the sewers. It's got a pretty good quest line, although the first mission to retrieve mantis eggs sends you all the way down into Vault 22, and it buries the eggs really deep into that dungeon, so it's kind of a huge pain to make progress on this quest. It's honestly easier to simply grab the eggs that are lying around on dead mantises near the schoolhouse or up near Jacobstown, so it would have been nice if the waypoint pointed you there instead, but I suppose I'm nitpicking. There was another quest planned for the Thorn that was ultimately removed, in which you unlock the creature cages and unleash the feral beasts to cause havoc and mayhem in Westside. This uprising was ultimately cut, like so many other things, due to time restraints during development. Much like with Freeside, there are quite a few mods out there that add a bit more life to Westside, adding more places to visit, people to talk to, and things to do, so it feels a bit more lively.
Oh, hell yeah! Hope you don't mind if I do my repairs with an erection, because I got one!
And if you thought Westside was lacking in content, let's talk about the North Vegas Square. With only 2 named NPCs, a single intact building, and 1 quest line, there's definitely room for expansion. The final bit of that 1 quest line is actually pretty good though, with multiple ways to resolve it, but once that's done, there's not much else to do in this town. There aren't even very many mods that enhance this area, although I did have fun with a couple of them that added more work. So, with all the lesser districts explored, let's finally enter the New Vegas Strip. In the vanilla game, it's pretty bland and forgettable. The area is split up by a metal barrier to accommodate for technological limitations. When it's removed and more lights and buildings and people are added, the strip really comes to life and becomes the jewel of the Mojave, as it was meant to be. Each of the casinos has some work for you, and the whole place is deeply intertwined with the main quest, which involves deciding who ends up controlling the area. One of the biggest annoyances in this game is that no matter which casino you walk into, they're going to confiscate all your weapons. And then when you finally get your weapons back, you have to re-hotkey all your items. Yeah, that's super annoying. I'm glad I have mods on that automatically re-hotkey all the stuff that got taken away. The quest that takes place at the Ultralux is one of the best quests in the game in my opinion, with many different ways for it to play out. And the casino itself is very memorable and unique. Sometimes these casinos all start to look alike, but this one, you're not going to forget. The Gamora has two quests that are pretty good too. The smaller one involves ferrying messages between Carlitos and Joanna, and they're separated by several loading zones, so that actually gets a bit tedious and kind of sucks. If I could rework that quest, I would make Carlitos a bit more assertive, and maybe he already had the idea in his head to rescue Joanna, so I wouldn't have to go back and forth convincing each other to help each other out. Just cut down on the backtracking a bit. I think the quest is good, but there's a bit too much backtracking. The other quest is a bit better and more complex, and it involves figuring out who's going to end up running the Gamora Casino. It's good, I like it a lot, but this quest is very buggy. From a design standpoint, I like it a lot, but yeah, it bugs out a lot. For example, I feel like almost nobody has ever actually seen the Pimp Boy 3000 in-game, due to how the requirements to get it are kind of glitchy. And I cannot count the number of times that the dead prostitute that I was supposed to find wasn't actually dead, which was kind of awkward. Again, I think this quest is really good, although I do think the ability to pickpocket Kachino's journal is a bit too easy. It would have been more interesting if the player were forced to find a way to get into his room. Although, while we're on the subject, I'd like to comment on the pickpocketing mechanic and how it compares to the speech mechanic from Fallout 3. In that game, both speech checks and pickpocketing checks heavily involved random chance. Even with your skills maxed out, it was still possible to fail these checks if you were simply unlucky. Fallout New Vegas changed the speech system into something more consistent and predictable, having explicit requirements that determine if you pass or fail. But the pickpocketing mechanic did not receive the same treatment. It's still a gamble on whether or not you'll progress the quest, or instead get into a fatal shootout with an entire building. In fact, the actual formula for determining success is pretty convoluted when you look into it. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. An item's weight or bulk doesn't really factor into it, the victim's perception attribute doesn't factor into it, or even the player's luck stat, ironically. And the chance of success isn't even displayed when pickpocketing, which makes failure feel even more unfair. Additionally, the chance of success actually maxes out at 85%, which means that no matter how skilled you are, there's always a decent chance of failing and being caught. And I feel like all these restrictions are very unfair, especially considering that the consequences for failure could be very drastic. So I greatly appreciate mods that change the formula to something that makes more sense and explicitly show the likelihood of success. And it would be nice to remove that 85% cap as well. Because, unlike with speech checks, pickpocketing failures are not fun. In fact, taking a step back, I think I'd enjoy a completely overhauled pickpocketing system where random chance doesn't factor into it at all, and instead it's a strictly binary pass-fail system, kind of like the speech system. I think that would eliminate save scumming a lot. But back to the casinos. The Gamora has good quests. Ultralux also has a great one. The Tops is intertwined with the main quest of the game. There are many options for dealing with Benny, and, I appreciate that. There's also a smaller quest to find some new talent for the Aces Theater, which I think is a pretty good one. You go out there, recruit some new acts, and they'll start working at the Aces Theater. I like how the marquee outside gets updated whenever you add a new act, and you can actually visit the theater afterward and watch them all perform. The in-house covers of well-known songs are actually really good, and the insult comic will tell different jokes that reflect your actual character build, calling you clumsy if you've got low agility, or mocking you and calling you a cow if you've got high strength.
Hey, look at this guy. I didn't know they let Brahmin into this joint.
Given that this whole questline is easily missed side content, it's very impressive. There's also plenty of gambling to do here on the strip, and I like that having a high luck attribute increases your odds of winning with most games. That's a fun touch. It's kind of annoying how much of a cap there is when you gamble, and it's also annoying the way your bid resets back down to 1 every time you play a new hand. Aside from the casinos, there's also Vault 21 and Michelangelo's Workshop, both of which have some busy work to do if you're interested. Couple that with the NCR Embassy and the monorail station, and the whole place is exciting to visit. There's so much to do. But that doesn't mean there couldn't be more to do, like this small mission I added to Michelangelo's Workshop, where you help an old man repair a damaged Securitron.
True to Kaiser.
And finally, there's the Lucky 38, where you meet the enigmatic Mr. House. It's a really cool location, but hauntingly empty. You can establish player housing here, although if you do, you should probably download a mod that will let you fast travel in and out. Otherwise, you'll be forced to pass through several loading zones anytime you want to stop on by. I also feel like the presidential suite that you end up with doesn't look as nice as the cocktail lounge that you can visit. I think it would have been nicer if that could have been your player housing, and your companions could hang out there, instead of being stuffed into a cramped room. And maybe you could use your repair skill to get some of these slot machines working for them, so they got something to keep them occupied. Speaking of the Lucky 38, let's take a moment to talk about the game's collectibles, because Mr. House collects the snow globes you can find, and they'll automatically get added to your collection inside the building. I just love finding collectibles in these games. The bobbleheads in Fallout 3, the snow globes in New Vegas, and the postcards and collectible trading cards in my modded copy of Fallout 4. It's just so much fun to find this kind of stuff and add it to a display. And I know I'm not alone in feeling this way, because there are a couple of mods out there that bring back the bobbleheads from Fallout 3 into New Vegas. And honestly, if there were a way to display all these playing cards I've been collecting, I'd be way more excited to find them. It would have at least been a lot more interesting than shoving them into an unused caravan deck. A lot of these cards have some unique artwork, so it would be pretty nice to frame them, or put them into a display case or something. Before leaving the strip, let's talk about the 4 main factions you can side with to beat the game. The first 2 are obvious, the NCR and Legion. They're each vying for control of New Vegas and Hoover Dam, so assisting one generally requires sabotaging the other. And if you progress too far in one faction's questline, you'll get locked out of the other ones. This will give you a bit of time to hang out with each faction, learn what their goals and methods are like, and make an informed decision on if you want to keep on working with them. Now, the NCR has good intentions, but they are ultimately a corrupt, bloated, bureaucratic mess of an organization with an overextended army that continuously fails in their duty to secure the territory they've taken. The majority of the game is spent doing their jobs for them and seeing all of the problems caused by their unwanted presence here. And while the NCR deserve plenty of the criticisms they receive, they're also the only ones fighting back against the army of brutal slavers who would otherwise be conquering all these towns. From their point of view, I can imagine it must be incredibly infuriating. They lost so many soldiers during the first Legion attack on the dam, and throughout the entire game, you see they're still losing people every day. And then they gotta put up with these ungrateful locals talking about how useless the NCR is, and how much they don't need the NCR, and how much better it would be if the NCR was gone so they could remain independent. They're all completely clueless about the fact that the NCR is the only thing separating them from being nailed to a 2x4 and set on fire. And speaking of the Legion, that's the other main faction you'll be seeing. For the majority of the game, they will often be shown in the worst possible light. They have been kidnapping and enslaving the locals, attacking caravans, and crucifying anyone who looks at them cross-eyed. They're monsters, and by the time you reach the 3rd city they've wiped off the map, it becomes difficult to see how they have any redeeming qualities. And the truth is, they really don't. Or rather, if they do have redeeming qualities, we don't really get to see them. If you ask people about them, they rarely have anything nice to say. Sometimes you'll get a bit of insight from someone who will tell us in passing that Legion territory used to be a lot worse. But again, since we never actually see Legion territory, it's hard to believe it actually does look good. The only thing we get to see is the front line of their war machine, and that is absolutely horrific. In fact, the Legion's main base will likely be your next destination after visiting the New Vegas Strip. And even when you're finally on that side of the river, they still won't look good. Women used as cattle, women sold as chattel, children trained for battle. And if you were expecting to receive some quests from the Legion that paint them in a softer light, you're gonna be disappointed. Again, there's a notable lack of Legion content in this game in general due to the time constraints during development. And even this place, the most Legion-centric area of the game, doesn't have much for you to do. Some pit fighting, talk to a few slaves, and maybe do some errands. And most of their tasks can be completed in only one way. For example, there's a damaged howitzer, but you can't use your repair skill to fix it. You gotta go on a fetch quest, no matter how good your repair skill is. A lot of Legion quests are like that. Ironically, there's just not a lot of freedom there. The only thing that comes close to redeeming the Legion in any way would have to be the leader himself, Lord Caesar, or Caesar. It's a bit of an unexpected twist that the leader of this war-heavy, murderous organization would be so well-educated and so well-spoken. It's fun to pick his brain and hear him try to justify his atrocities. He speaks with so much conviction and authority that you can start to understand why people are drawn to his rule. He'll talk about how life was like in Arizona and New Mexico before the Legion swept on in and pacified the lands. For the people who lived in those areas, the alternative for the Legion's safe roads wasn't the NCR's unsafe roads. It was roads patrolled by a bunch of raiders who will rip your skin off for fun and laugh about it. And in that context, the Legion starts to seem a bit more palatable. He'll tell you about all the territory the Legion has conquered, how many tribes they've subdued and assimilated, and it really puts into perspective how strong they are and how pathetic the NCR actually is. The Legion might not be the nicest group to tame the Wasteland, but they might actually be the only group capable of doing it. Of course, neither the Legion nor the NCR know about the secret third faction, Mr. House. This one man from pre-war times had all the technology, all the wealth, and all the foresight to know that the bombs would be dropping and to do something about it. It's only because of him that the city of Vegas was able to survive the apocalypse, and for the last few decades, he's been attempting to rule it from the shadows. If you agree to help him and empower his technological might, it will lead to something that would otherwise be impossible. A New Vegas that is independent of Legion and NCR rule. Sure, he'll help the NCR push the Legion out of the Mojave, but ultimately, he will deny them control of Hoover Dam and the Vegas area, putting those locations permanently under his authoritative rule instead. Whether or not this is a preferable ending largely hinges on whether or not you trust him and agree with his goals. Under his rule, Vegas would be at its most prosperous and its citizens well protected, but any potential challenge to his authority would be swiftly eradicated. He's a man capable of all the brutality of the Legion, but without the ambition to assert his influence outside the city, at least for now. Despite his flaws, it's clear he is incredibly confident in his abilities, and he does have a proven track record of success. As far as potential dictators go, he's definitely not the worst choice. But if you side with any of the other factions, you'll ultimately have to oppose him, which means you'll end up fighting your way through his penthouse suite and past his robot army to get to him, which sounds really cool, but ultimately it's pretty easy to do. Just gotta hack a terminal or two, duck some gunfire, and bam, you're in. Which is a bit of a shame. This part has a lot of potential to be a lot more intense if it were set up a bit better. But when you get to the end, you finally meet the man in person, and the reveal is pretty memorable. Once he's dealt with, you'll have the Lucky 38 casino all to yourself. Yup, this whole empty casino. Unused, unappreciated. It's a real shame there's no option to open it up to the general public and maybe earn some passive income. And then there's the fourth faction you can side with, a reprogrammed robot aptly named Yes Man, who can assist you in establishing a truly independent New Vegas. for better or for worse. Working with him will ensure that the city of Vegas remains prosperous and free, and the regions around Vegas will become free as well, although not necessarily free of violence, because it's going to be a chaotic free-for-all. Yeah, without any leadership, some areas will fare better than others, and some of their fates will hinge on how well the player set them up for success. I do like how the Yes Man route cleverly provides a fail-safe option for beating the game, as he's the only faction leader that can't be permanently killed. Also, sometimes it's fun to play the game like a complete moron, doing everything you can to make the world worse, and then watch as Yes Man struggles to find a way to praise you for it. Which of these factions is the best for the Mojave? It is a frequent topic of debate surrounding the game. While few would seriously argue in favor of Caesar's Legion, especially considering how unflattering they are presented, there's no clear winner among the other three options. But in the end, a decision will need to be made. None of these four factions can exist alongside the others, and each will require you to do some unpleasant dirty work. All of them except for Yes Man, of course, who will only suggest unpleasant dirty work. And if you don't want to get your hands dirty, you don't have to. You're the boss after all. But regardless of who you side with, the next stop will likely be the Boomer faction to the far northeast of the map. The only way to get there is to run across the artillery field, which is very memorable. There does exist a secret alternate route via the train tunnel on the other side of the hills, but it still requires you to run across the artillery field. I mean, really now, you have to know where the door is, have a lockpicking skill that is completely maxed out, sneak past or fight your way past the Death Claws, then fight your way through the ghouls, avoid the landmines, and you're still gonna make me dodge artillery fire? Come on, throw me a bone here. Okay, so the train tracks do kind of shield you from the artillery fire, so it's not that bad. But still, that's a lot. The Boomers do have one big quest that is comprised of several smaller missions, and many of them are quite good, such as the mission for the chief mechanic, the one for the museum caretaker, one for the doctor, and one for the head of security. The only mission I would say isn't good is the one you do for Jack, and it requires you to serve as his gopher between him and the woman he's been admiring/stalking at the Crimson Caravan. That quest requires constant backtracking, back and forth, it's annoying. Some of that backtracking could have been eliminated if the premise of the quest were tweaked a little bit. For instance, instead of Jack being the woman's secret admirer, the two of them could be star-crossed lovers who already want to meet up, and the player can immediately start making that happen. You know, instead of spending a good portion of time walking them through their feelings. But as a whole, the area is alright. Most of these missions are fine, there's a lot of fun places to explore, and the finale of the questline where you raise a sunken bomber, that's fine too. Another important faction you'll be dealing with is the Brotherhood of Steel. Their storied history with the NCR is fascinating to learn about, and I like how many options there are to get access to their base. You can find one of their dead paladins, or lockpick their door, or be told where their base generally is by somebody else. You can also bring Veronica with you, which lets you skip one of the first missions the Brotherhood would have forced you into. There's a fair bit of stuff to see down in the Brotherhood's base, a few people to talk to. In terms of quests, well, there's an incredibly annoying mission to isolate a computer virus. Can't say I'm a big fan of that one. Although I might have had a better time if I knew about the science and repair skill checks that make the mission easier. The most important quest, though, is given by the Elder, who wants you to find 3 missing patrols, and then retrieve 3 scout reports, and then retrieve 3 pieces of tech that can be used to fix the air filtration system. This quest is probably one of the most tedious ones in the entire game, given how much backtracking it requires, and also the difficulty of having to go through 3 entire vaults to get the air filtration equipment. It would have been nice if he had given you all the tasks at the same time, instead of requiring you to go all the way back to base each time to make incremental progress. Why can't I just report back to him on a radio of some kind? They definitely exist in-universe, and it would have cut down on the monotony. And why do we have to go through 3 whole vaults to find some air filters? Wouldn't one have sufficed? Couldn't you have given me the coordinates for 3 potential locations and only forced me to go through 1? Yeah, so this quest is kind of tedious. There is an alternate quest that can be done instead that skips this nonsense by usurping the Elder and replacing him with somebody else. And I'm glad that option exists. but it would have been nice if I made that decision on my own terms, based on whether or not I wanted to help this elder, and not simply because his mission is obnoxious. That's the end of the Brotherhood quests. If you're working with the NCR, you can put in a lot of extra effort to establish a peace treaty between the two factions, which is a pretty cool option. But if you want to keep working with Mr. House or Caesar's Legion, you're inevitably going to have to destroy the Brotherhood. There was some cut content that would have allowed you to establish a peace treaty between Mr. House and the Brotherhood, but that was intentionally cut to force the player to make a difficult decision, and also because Mr. House probably wouldn't ever agree to work with them. There was also an option to convince Caesar to ignore the Brotherhood, which I think should have definitely been kept in. If the player can persuade the Brotherhood into attacking the NCR during the final battle, it would have sown a lot of chaos in the NCR's backlines, and that is something that Caesar would have approved of, even if he doesn't believe continued coexistence is possible. I think leaving that option in would have done a great job at showcasing Caesar's appreciation for Machiavellian tactics, as well as giving the player a reason to go down the Brotherhood of Steel side quest to oust the more neutral elder. But what do you think? Should the Legion-Brotherhood alliance have been an option? And what about the Mr. House-Brotherhood alliance? Would that have been good too? Let me know in the comments, I'm curious. Another important faction you'll come across is the Great Khans. They're an adversarial raider group that often comes into conflict with the NCR. Their home at Red Rock Canyon stands out because the rocks are a more intense shade of brown, which is the closest this game gets to having different biomes. There's a small quest you can do for an initiate that only plays out one way, which is kinda lame. Would have been nice if there were more options for that one. The quest you get from Melissa is a bit better. Although short, it does have some skill checks, and there's more than one way the mission can shake out. And there's missions you can do for two Khans, Jack and Diane, and that's alright, even if the questline is a bit buggy. For instance, completing the drug deal with one of the fiends is exceptionally difficult because of how things are programmed. Doesn't always go smoothly. But that aside, they do offer you a very simple, inoffensive line of fetch quests. The Great Khans are in the middle of making an alliance with Caesar's Legion to attack the NCR, and if the player wants to break that up, there's a really fun quest line that provides a couple of different options. And with a little bit of extra elbow grease, again, you can establish a peace treaty between the Khans and the NCR. However, there's no quest for Legion-aligned players. I would have liked it if the local frumentarius you find gave you a mission to help the Legion's goals, stoke the fires of war, and amplify the Khans' existing hatred of the NCR. Maybe you could have outfitted them with better gear, or perhaps you could have led a Great Khan assault over the mountains and attacked the nearby ranger station. That would have been really cool. Or even something as simple as simply assassinate Regis, who has been holding the Khans back from fully committing to the Legion. Any of those options would have been great. For ideas on what additional Great Khan quests could have been implemented, I'll mention the Initiation, which opens up a way for the player themselves to join the faction after completing a series of quests. One more thing to note about Red Rock that I don't much care for is that there aren't any doctors or herbalists to treat your injuries. But I guess that makes sense because any sick Khans were killed by the NCR at Bitter Springs. Speaking of, let's discuss the site of that massacre. There are a few minor tasks you can complete at this location, most of which are busy work. Thematically, it's an important location, and it ties strongly into Boone's personal quest, but it's ultimately just a refugee camp that's got some refugees, and not much more. There isn't much to do in this area, but that's fine. Not every location needs a full dozen quests. Although, since Bitter Springs is so close to Camp Guardian and Ranger Station Bravo, and because they're all NCR-affiliated locations, it would have been nice if there were more interconnectivity between them. As it stands, Camp Guardian is mostly empty, save for a simple unmarked quest. The backstory of that place is told entirely through logbook notes scattered throughout the area, but I wouldn't necessarily say that's the most interesting way to tell a story. Honestly, I'm not going to bother talking about the different ways Camp Guardian could be improved upon, because there's basically nothing there right now, and any new content would basically be starting from scratch. There's one more NCR location that's got a noteworthy quest, and that's dealing with the Misfits at Camp Gulf. This is a poorly performing fired team of 4 people that needs to be improved. Each member of the team has an idea on how to improve their performance. It's a decent little quest. Could it be improved upon or expanded? Yeah, but it's also fine as it is. Camp Golf itself is a pretty big area though, so there is room for it to grow. Like this removed scene where locals try to steal some fresh water.
Screw it. Just shoot. They'll get the hint.
Moving to the far northwest, we've got the town of Jacobstown. This area stands out from the rest by actually having a different appearance, with snow-covered mountains and green trees. It's surprising more factions aren't fighting over this place. It would make a way better vacation spot than the Strip. It's nice to meet the town mayor, Marcus, who most players won't recognize from Fallout 2 because they never played it. So for many, this is the first time they get to meet him. He's got a small quest to scare away some mercenaries, as well as a bigger quest to help the local doctor cure the Nightkin of their schizophrenia. And that quest is fine, but the lodge here is a big place, and it would have been nice to get some more quests from the only super mutant settlement in the game. Now, let's talk vaults. They are a memorable component of any Fallout game, and New Vegas has its fair share of vaults. I've already mentioned a few of them. Vault 22 with all the plants, that's a really good one. Vault 3, that's just a fiend base, so not much to say about that. Vault 21 is just a gift shop on the Strip. And Vault 34 is the vault that was swarming with ghouls and radiation that you go to help the NCR clean up their water supply. That one was pretty good too. So that just leaves Vaults 11 and 19. Vault 11 is a fun one to explore. Not too many dangerous enemies, got a captivating story that you learn about as you progress through it. There could have been a bit more loot to find, but in the end it's a pretty good vault. And Vault 19 is a bit of a strange one. Like Prim, it contains a group of not quite powder gangers who talk as if they are powder gangers, but they don't wear powder ganger armor and don't respond to the powder ganger factional reputation system. Graciously though, this group of not powder gangers doesn't shoot you on sight, so that's kind of them. They've got a plan to reach out and join the Great Khans that you can involve yourself with and influence in a couple different ways. The vault itself is pretty small, and the story behind it is fairly simple. It's worth checking out, but nothing spectacular. According to the backstory of this vault, there was a battle going on between half of the residents who were in Blue Sector and half of the residents who were in Red Sector. So I like to use a mod that gives the Red Sector folks red vault suits. It just makes sense and looks fun. Overall, this vault is a decent enough place to visit with a decent enough quest to complete. I will say that one thing that kind of goes against a lot of these vaults is how they are all designed with multiple floors, which wouldn't normally be a problem, but by default, New Vegas doesn't tell you if a waypoint is above you or below you, so sometimes you'll go to a spot you think you need to be at, but you actually needed to be a floor above you or below you, and there's no way to know. And finally, we have reached the Hoover Dam. Even though this is where the final battle of the game takes place, you can swing by and visit it at any time. It's a really big place, too. A little too big, actually. First time I played this game, I remember wandering around and getting lost. It would have been nice if they restricted your ability to explore the entire dam, because there's no reason to go back there until the end of the game, and it goes on pretty deep. Even before the final battle, the dam is home to 2 of the best quests in the game, where you can either stop a presidential assassination or commit one yourself, and both quests are a lot of fun. It's worth doing a full evil playthrough of the game just so you can do this quest and repeat the assassination in a wide variety of fun ways. And when you do get to the final battle of the game, it's great to see all the allies you've recruited come to your assistance. The boomers flying over and dropping bombs, the Enclave remnants backing you up, Brotherhood soldiers and Great Khans can all make an appearance, each fighting at your side or against you depending on your interactions with them. You fight your way across the dam, into Legion territory, and stare down Legate Lanius, the final boss. You can exchange some dialogue with him, and that's great, although it's a bit too easy to convince him to stand down, in my opinion. Just gotta have a maxed out speech skill. I'm not opposed to the idea of being able to resolve this without violence, but I do think it should be a bit more difficult to achieve. Perhaps by learning more about the Legate and knowing what kind of speech checks would work on him. Or perhaps he would only be receptive to the idea of standing down if you've completed the vast majority of the NCR-aligned quests, which would give them ample resources to show off their firepower during this fight. Or they could have taken a page out of Fallout 1's book. Maybe Legate Lanius has one Achilles heel, a weakness, or maybe one singular argument that might work against him, but it's tucked away somewhere in the game and you've got to find it with thorough exploration. But however you inevitably deal with him, Legate Lanius will be defeated and General Oliver of the NCR will show up. Unless you've explicitly chosen to work with the NCR, you'll have to either fight him and his troops, or talk him down too. But that's more of a formality than anything. He's not much of a threat at this point. And that's pretty much how the final battle plays out, except if you're fighting for the Legion, which is basically an entirely different final battle where you're fighting into NCR territory across the dam. In that case, Legate Lanius is sending you to fight General Oliver, who is the final boss. And in this instance, General Oliver does feel like more of a final boss because he's being backed up by a lot of technology and soldiers. Overall, the final battle at Hoover Dam is a fitting end to the game, regardless of which faction you end up siding with. The alliances you've built and the preparations you've made are sufficiently showcased, and there are multiple ways to handle the final boss, whoever it is. That being said, it's a little underwhelming. This event is supposed to be the culmination of two incredibly powerful nations bringing the full might of their respective armies down on each other, allied with, or opposed, by several significantly powerful factions. And yet, the majority of this battle largely consists of you and a couple soldiers running down a linear pathway, killing a couple enemies here and there. And sure, it wouldn't be fair to expect the game to be able to handle a firefight between hundreds of soldiers. But the fact is that the final battle just doesn't feel epic enough. It's a skirmish at best, a probing attack. And even though I just praised how smaller factions like the Great Khans will show up and assist you, their numbers are limited. And the entire final mission is pretty short, too. You kill a couple dozen enemies, maybe do an optional objective, and then deal with the final boss. There's also not a lot of spectacle, aside from one or two things exploding or the boomers flying over and dropping a payload. Of course, if the development team had more resources and time, this final battle could have been significantly improved. For example, if you were fighting for the NCR, you could have had a side mission to assist Colonel Moore, who's been pinned down somewhere in the dam. Or maybe she's been captured by the elite Praetorian Lucius, and you have to find a way to free her. Or perhaps if you've invested into your medicine skill, you could take some time to aid some injured troopers. Again, it's fine as it is, if not a little underwhelming. The slideshow that plays out at the end does a lot of heavy lifting when it comes to giving you consequences for your actions. It's so simple, yet surprisingly effective. Just a few lines of dialogue telling you the fates of different factions. And when you see that one of the factions you were helping out ended up with a suboptimal ending, it makes you wonder if you could do things a bit better, which is an incentive to come back to the game and try it again. Damn near everyone gets a slide here. The major factions, the minor factions, and every recruited companion. And all of their fates can vary wildly depending on how you help them and which faction you sided with in the end. Arcade Ganon has 11 potential endings. The King's? A whopping 13. It is extensive, which is something to be commended. The only slide I'm not a fan of is the one narrated by Eddie. If you don't have subtitles on, good luck figuring out what it's saying. Yeah, I don't have subtitles on, so I have no idea what was just said. And it's a good thing that the ending slideshow is so good, because there's no post-game content. Once the final battle is over, the game is over. And if you want to go back, you'll need to load an earlier save from before the fighting. It's a shame you can't continue playing to see how your actions shape the local area. It would have been nice to see House of Securitrons patrolling Freeside, the Legion banner flying over Vegas, or the NCR dominating its brand new territory. There were plans during development to make this a reality, but you know what I'm going to say here. Time restraints during development led to content being cut. But there are mods that give us a glimpse into what the world might look like if it hadn't. And I would say we've reached the end, but there are 4 big downloadable content packages. 4 DLCs, big adventures, multiple hours long, full of things to do and people to talk to. The first and most contentious of New Vegas' add-on content is Dead Money. It is a super fun but stupidly annoying casino heist adventure. Whether or not you think this add-on adventure is good or not will pretty much hinge on if you like the new characters and the new emphasis on stealth survival. Not everyone is going to appreciate being stripped of all their gear and forced to play in a slower, more methodical way. But I did. However, like most people, I found the toxic gas and deadly radios to be extremely annoying and unforgiving, so I typically use mods that nullify those portions of the game. And while I like a lot of ideas that this DLC presents, it's also notoriously difficult to be stealthy, as some of these creatures will frequently spot you at long distances, regardless of their low perception. Still, the Sierra Madre is an amazing setting for a location to explore. There are a lot of abandoned, destroyed, and decrepit houses that you can scavenge through, finding resources to keep you going. And the 3 companions that you end up working with are very unique, very interesting. I think Dog/God is a really fascinating concept, basically 2 companions in one that you can switch between. The companion, Dean Domino, has a deep personal history with this location that you can uncover as you make your way through it. And then there's Christine, who I'm not a fan of because she doesn't talk at all, and she really doesn't communicate with you unless you read the subtitles, and I'm not a fan of that. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. Mute characters in video games can work, but if you take away the primary method that someone can communicate, you need to replace it with something, not nothing. Give her more animations. Actually show her performing the gestures that you're telling me that she's performing. But overall, Dead Money is a great bit of content that, again, will largely hinge on whether or not you actually enjoy the changes it makes and the different way it plays compared to the vanilla game. And it's not going to be for everyone. The next DLC is Honest Hearts. It has a great world space that would fit nicely into a survival game, but I wouldn't say it's interesting enough for Fallout New Vegas. It looks really great though, or at least it did back in the day. It's maybe a little more dated these days, but it's still a nice world space. But I just don't think they do enough with it. A lot of the quests you can do are mindless fetch quests, and the interregional conflict between the warring tribesfolk, it's not really interesting enough to fill several hours of runtime. And there's also not a lot of powerful loot, being that it is just a bunch of tribals here. Not a lot of secret military bases holding caches of powerful equipment. In fact, let's face it, the only reason most people like this DLC is because of the character Joshua Graham. He basically carries the entire experience on his back. He is the most memorable portion of Honest Hearts, and he's what people think of when they think of this content.
I pray for the safety of all good people who come to Zion, even Gentiles. But we can't expect God to do all the work.
You do arrive in this canyon with a caravan of somewhat interesting people. It's just a shame that they're all scripted to die and there's no way to prevent it. They were kind of fun. At the very least, I wish the companions you end up recruiting had more interesting things to say. I wish that I could take the companion, Follows Chalk, and bring him back to the vanilla game to get his reaction on locations. I wish the caves that you could explore didn't all feel very much the same. I wish some of these folks gave you more interesting things to do other than retrieve lunchboxes and a compass and a sensor module, etc., etc. I just wish the whole thing were better. It says a lot when the quest that most people remember most from this DLC is an unmarked follow the notes trail that leads to a unique set of armor. And that's kind of how Honest Hearts is. The whole experience is okay, it's not bad, but it's not amazing. I suspect the people that like Fallout 3 more than Fallout New Vegas might actually enjoy this content though. With only 2 or 3 hub areas for you to walk around and talk to folks, a lot of the game is spent just walking around the Wasteland, killing some animals, going into caves, going into abandoned ruins, scavenging the old world for interesting things. And there is some fun to be had with that. Again, Honest Hearts isn't bad. The next big DLC is Old World Blues, and it is the most well-regarded. The gameplay feels very reminiscent of Fallout 3, with only 1 hub area and a lot of collapsed buildings. You can find a lot of unique weapons, like the gun that barks, or an incendiary power fist. There's several interesting bits of technology you can find too, like the auto-healing stealth suit that communicates to you. And you can encounter very off-putting enemies, corpses that are still being puppeted by the AI-powered suits. You can also find plenty of upgrades for your home base. You can bring the modules back, install them, and activate them, and suddenly your base becomes a lot more functional. Additionally, a lot of the technology that you bring to life literally feels like it's being brought to life because it will speak to you.
I am online once again!
And while you're enjoying the downtime, you can also talk to the think tank, 5 floating brains in jars who have very distinct personalities and will talk your ear off for quite some time. In fact, that's probably the biggest weakness of this DLC, is that when you first arrive, they will talk to you for what feels like at least an hour. They have a lot to say, and while a lot of what they say is fun, sometimes you feel like jumping into the action and talking to them later. But no, a massive amount of dialogue is front-loaded, and you get blasted with a face full of it. Aside from that, there isn't much else I can nitpick about this DLC. It's really great. I do have a personal preference of having a traveling companion, which is something that Old World Blues lacks. I've played around with a mod that allows you to travel alongside the Cyberdog that you can build, but that's not part of the vanilla game, and really, it should have been. Roxy should have been a companion, come on. Or maybe one of those horrible trauma override harnesses could have been one of my companions. That could have been a lot of fun. And once you found enough powerful technology, you can track down the antagonist Mobius and put an end to him once and for all. Overall, there's a reason that this bit of add-on content is as respected as it is. People really enjoy Old World Blues. And now the last DLC, Lonesome Road. It is a lengthy and fairly linear bit of content that throws a lot of powerful enemies at you to test your combat skills. As you make your way through, the antagonist Ulysses will communicate with you over the radio. And a lot of people criticize how obnoxiously verbose he is, but he's got a lot of great dialogue. And I thought it was really cool how a lot of what he has to say is tailored to the faction you're aligned with. Although, I agree, it would be nice to be able to skip through it a little faster, just end the conversation before it begins sometimes. Sometimes I just want to back out a conversation and shoot the robot that's talking to me. But in the end, I don't think it's that big of a deal. For me, the bigger crime that this DLC makes is that it attempts to foist a backstory onto the player, who up until this point has largely been a blank slate. I've already figured out who my character is. I've created a backstory for them. And now you're telling me my backstory? No, you don't get to do that. The gameplay of this content, though, is a lot of fun, despite being tough and somewhat linear. There are some fun bits of weaponry you can find, like the red glare missile launcher, or that thing that you can use that will detonate nuclear devices that are scattered around. The shoulder-mounted machine gun, there is a lot of fun stuff to find. And it is a lot of fun to scrounge around, picking armors off these corpses you find, these ramshackle pieces of armor that have been crafted out of stop signs and whatever's been lying around. Scrounging and scavenging and clawing for every little bit of progress you make. It's just really cool. It was also nice to travel alongside an upgraded version of Eddie, who sometimes communicates through more than just beeps and boops. While Eddie is fun, there's no reason why I couldn't have brought my other companions with me for this journey. In fact, after getting an earful from Ulysses, it might be nice to turn around, talk to your companions and say, "Can you believe this guy? Can you believe the crap he's saying?" But in the end, Lonesome Road is a fun adventure, Ulysses serves as a really good final boss, and you can avoid fighting him at the very end if you've been thorough with your exploration and found all the little bits of history that will clue you in as to what would work to convince him to stand down. That's great. That's an amazing incentive to explore thoroughly and spend some time in the area as opposed to running to the end. Or you could just pass a speech check to convince him to stand down. It's a bit too easy with the speech checks. Even still, at the very end, just max out your speech and it's the win button. But that's the end. We've done the entire game. We've done all 4 major bits of content. What more is there? What more is there indeed? Mods. I have been talking a lot over the last few hours about the different mods that can enhance the vanilla experience. Ways that different creators have tried to fix some of the perceived flaws with the game. But thanks to them, there are also so many more new adventures you can go on. Yes, we've got 4 official pieces of DLC, but we've got hundreds of unofficial DLC, some of which are actually incredibly impressive. This game is a decade old, and yet the community is still showing it so much love and appreciation, and still giving us new ways to enjoy it. People are making adventures that rival or exceed the quality given to us by the 4 base game DLCs. They are experimenting with new, outlandish, extreme ideas. Sometimes they flop, and sometimes they're very intriguing. It's an amazing world out there, and if you've only known Fallout New Vegas on PlayStation or Xbox, it's worth going back to on PC and enjoying the myriad of different adventures you can go on. If you play Fallout New Vegas because you enjoy the role-playing elements, there are adventures that take your choices into account and will give you a custom experience. If you're more in it for the action, then there are plenty of bounty-style mods out there, adventures where you go out and pursue different characters, trying to capture them or kill them in different ways. Or, if you're not a fan of combat, there are mods that don't have any combat in them whatsoever, and they emphasize different elements. There are mods out there that tell a really good story and feel like they could have almost been part of the base game. But there's no shortage of mods out there that embrace the silly nature of Fallout, giving you some of the wackiest stories you've ever seen. Would you like to play a spooky mod with horror-styled elements? Because that's available. Would you like to see what Fallout New Vegas would be like if it were a completely different kind of game entirely? Or maybe you'd be interested in an entirely new campaign, an adventure that's as big as Fallout New Vegas itself. These are all things that people have made and are available right now for free as long as you have a copy of Fallout New Vegas for PC. They're waiting for you. Thank you for listening to me rant about this game I truly enjoy. If you'd like to hear my analyses of Fallout New California or Fallout The Frontier, I'll put them up right now so you can check those out. Or if you'd like to hear me talk about the different companions available in Fallout New Vegas, I've got a video on that as well. And I promise you, this will not be the last time I talk about the Fallout video game series. Talk to you again soon.